Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Escondido City Council. Please rise for a moment of reflection and remain standing for the flag salute.
Yes, please join me in a moment of reflection. We come together tonight to say thank you. Thank you for the privilege, the blessing, the honor it is to serve here in the city of Escondido. We come together tonight as a diverse community, a community of different backgrounds, different beliefs, different presents, and different futures, yet one common goal, that is the betterment of this city. We come together tonight to seek guidance, wisdom, and discernment during deliberations that transpire this evening. And in doing so, we lift up Councilmember Morosco, Councilmember Garcia, Councilmember Martinez, Deputy Mayor Garcia, and Mayor White. May they be granted peace and wisdom as they lead our city into a bright and prosperous future. Amen.
All right, we'll call this meeting to order. Councilmember Morosco.
Present.
Councilmember Garcia.
Present.
Councilmember Martinez. Deputy Mayor Garcia.
Here.
I, Mayor White, am here. Do we have a report out of closed session?
No public report.
Okay. Any public comments to open the meeting?
None.
Okay. That takes us to our consent calendar. Items 1 through 7 are on consent. Items on consent aren't discussed individually and are approved in a single motion. I will go ahead and move to approve the consent calendar. I have a second. Please open the voting.
Voting is open. Mayor White, may you register your vote one more time, sorry. Motion approved,
There we
5-0.
What's that? That's what I saw too. Okay, on to our current business. Item 8 is the community survey results.
Yes. Honorable Mayor,
Perfect.
Honorable Mayor and City Council, we have Adam Probolski here to present the community survey results. These have already been presented to the budget subcommittee as well.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, thank you for having me here today. Really appreciate the opportunity that we've had to work with your staff. It's been a really enjoyable process. So with that, I will get started going through some data. Hope you're excited about numbers. Please feel free, whatever your protocol is, interrupt me or we can take questions at the end. Just to start off, this is a very typical statistically valid survey that we might do for any other political subdivision, any other city in California or anywhere else in the country. It's a multi-mode survey that we conducted, essentially trying to be as inclusive as possible, talking to people on the phone, including landlines, because there's some people still talk on those, but mobiles. And then, of course, onboarding people to the survey experience by emailing and texting them and giving them a chance to onboard. They were offered the chance to complete the survey in English or Spanish, and 8% of your voters chose to respond in Spanish. We always caution that doesn't mean they don't speak English or that your English respondents don't speak another language. It just means that's what's preferred in their home. And 400 is a robust survey for a city, the city of the size of Escondido. To give you some perspective, statewide we might do 900 or 1,000, so it's quite robust for a city this size. Getting into your demographics. This is not your voters. This is not your residents. This is your likely voters. This is who we expect to show up in November based upon past history and based upon some other key factors that we as pollsters, no black box trickery. It's just kind of our expectations based upon some numbers. So this is what you look like. You're a little bit older when it comes to demographic of who's going to turn out. And you see some other big things like, 79% were born here in the U.S., but you've got a pretty sizable 21% that were born in another country. And the changes there among council district are you set council districts based on population. This is based on likely voter. And so in some of those council districts, you have smaller turnout, and therefore that's some of those reasons. It's fully representative of your broader community of likely voters. Getting right into some key numbers here, we did some querying on looking at Measure S Prop S, and looking at perhaps some changes there, and we've got a few slides here to discuss the prospect of what would happen if you went out for that. And you can see here, making a change doesn't to Prop S doesn't really have the broad public support that someone who would want to pursue that would want. You have a plurality who say no, they don't support that kind of a change, and you've got a good group of people who are unsure. This tells us that there's real prospect for change when it comes to development and growth in the city. You just aren't there yet. This is the kind of thing where more outreach is more likely to be a part of the plan for some period of time. We look at it again, we say in general, do you support or oppose building higher density housing in the city in areas where Prop S restricts it? And you can see a slim majority say they oppose it. So again, not off the chart numbers, but certainly majorities saying that they don't want that. And then we do ask them, what kind of development do you want? And not surprisingly, they like the idea of parks and trails and open space. So you get to focus in on that, but they're also open to downtown mixed use and suburban residential and other things that are possibilities. But for the most part, it's their big thumbs up is to parks and open space. We look through a bunch of different arguments that people might encounter, whether coming from City Hall wouldn't necessarily advocate, but things like people in the community might talk through. And the things that move people the most on things like development are the possibility, the prospect for housing, workforce housing for teachers and police officers, librarians, people who, I guess in some communities might call blue collar or working class, or different classifications. But and then when we do talk specifically about blue collar, you also have high percentages. So these are the places where you might go if you're going to talk about the need for these kind of housing. You'd adapt greater levels of support if you talked about those ones higher up on the list. And then we like to do kind of a gut check in our research and ask questions in ways that we all talk, in words that we're all familiar with. And that's what we've done here. We put statement 1 versus statement number 2. Statement number 1 essentially says a growing city is a growing economy and has this overt support for development. And statement number 2 says big developers want to bulldoze our homes. That is almost intentionally charged because those are the kind of words your neighbors might say to each other across the backyard fence or in the front yard. And you can see no clear majority, but certainly a plurality agreeing more with the idea of development being scary to people. So a longer curve on this kind of a project if that's something that there's a policy direction. We looked at cannabis in the city, and we gave the voters an approximated ballot label, which is what you see when you're sitting at your kitchen table, right there on the ballot when you vote yes or no. And when we present them with that, the 7% tax, a limit of no more than 8 dispensaries, and we come up with a 61% voting yes, saying they support cannabis in the city with all those other components to it. 33% saying no, a small group unsure. This is a decent-sized majority, as you probably know, based upon typical elections. What is it that makes people want to vote yes for this? Well, we asked them that question, and we have it open-ended. So among that 61% who say they're voting yes, they say it brings income to the revenue to the city, tax revenues, tax benefits, economic development. It's legal. We might as well let people buy it. So you kind of see that list is largely positive among the people who say they support it. And then we do want to we never want to leave anybody behind, so we ask the people, that less than 1/3 who said that they oppose it, what's the reason you oppose it? And you can see 19% saying there's concern about public safety and some other elements behind that. Nothing really big standing out, though. So you get a sense of the answers there. And we do again here kind of go through all these different elements of what cannabis would mean, the arguments that people might hear in the public forum. And number 1 makes people more supportive is this idea that you could buy locally, tax revenue would stay here in the city. We did a split sample, what you can see in that box below, where half the respondents got the first answer and the first question, and the second half got split sample A, which goes well below, which is not so enticing to people, the idea of saving on emissions. You can see there's several there that are majority movers, generating $1 million in tax for the city for city essential services. Each of those things in the majority are things that you'd probably want to talk about if you were to put it on the ballot. It'd be a net positive for you to do. So here we look at those numbers again. When we started out, we're at 61%. We give some arguments, positive and negative, in that process. We tell them about what people say who oppose it. And you can see your support falls to 57%, but not a dramatic drop. And your opposition goes up a little bit, but you still have a really strong differential between the informed yes and the informed no. And so that's a big consideration when you're looking at cannabis. Again, we do this neighbor-to-neighbor conversation, and you can see that 50% agree with statement number 2, who says, hey, it's a good idea, no evidence of bad impacts on the community. And statement number 1 is at 37%. It says it's a terrible idea. We're going to get crime and traffic accidents, the things that you might typically hear from opponents. So majority, even in this kind of more charged environment, supports cannabis and tax. Next, we have a sales tax prospect, and here again we present the idea of a sales tax that could generate a large amount of revenue for the city to accomplish big things. This is the ballot label that we've approximated, and the city attorney obviously at the end writes this if it goes to ballot. 56% say yes, they support it. 34% say no. You've got 10% that are unsure and could be moved on the subject. We wanted to look at why they're voting yes, and among the yes voters, they have this whole list of things. The city needs the money. We could pursue crime and lower crime. It's a small price to pay. Nothing big stands out, but definitely some reasons why people are supportive. And then among the people who say no, just this kind of general taxes are high. And that's understandable, but it is a big number among that, about 1/3 of the population. And then a whole bunch of other things that you might expect to see in there. Some people who aren't necessarily excited about funding police or something else. And then here we do look at the several different taxes, and we identify where people would fall if you had, let's say, the cannabis plus the sales tax, or just the sales tax, or just the cannabis. And you can see there's support there in moderated numbers for each of those different scenarios. And I'm sure staff has other thoughts on this on the way this looks. I do want to give you another perspective here on the possibility or the reality of the San Diego County, the transit sales tax that Sandag is looking at. You've got 56% supporting that, voting yes, with a little less than 1/3 voting no. So that's another reality that's going to be on the ballot. And that's the end of taxes. Moving quickly, so I'm happy to go back at any point. Next, we get to some, yes, please.
Quick question in regards to that. If you could just elaborate a little bit more in regards to what was explained in regard to the Sandag tax and how it would be allocated to Escondido?
So a little bit, one of the things that you see in the question is the Sandag question. Again, what Adam referenced is it points to local away from state, and that does generally create an uptick in interest keeping those dollars local. What I think you can see I think it was slide, is it 18, Adam? If you go one more back, 16, 15, is it the one with the multiple, where's the one with the multiple questions about all of the measures? If you were going to pick one sort of.
Here we go.
Yeah, 21. So what you see is it's going to be a crowded ballot. We know it's going to be a crowded ballot. If folks are going to make a single choice, they may have their preferences of where they're going to go. So one of the interesting things is that Sandag says local. But of course that local is the county, but it doesn't specify that. It makes it feel like it's hyper-local to your community, when in reality that would be going through a process of allocation at the level of the MPO, right? So,
And obviously, we already know that means that it does not come to Escondido. So they would be voting for something to go local that would not help Escondido one iota. I just wanted to see how deep they went into that, so thanks.
Yeah, and you have some ability to communicate some of that. Obviously, you're not in the business of advocating, but you can definitely communicate some of that, and city attorney will keep you in check. All right, let's look at some overall things and what the city is thinking, what your voters are thinking. So this is an open-ended question. We actually started the survey with this, but we wanted to show you the other data first. We asked them what's the top issue facing Escondido, and 35% say homelessness. That's a pretty sizable number compared to everything else on that list. So it's definitely something to be aware of. And it doesn't mean that people aren't concerned about, let's say, healthcare or terrorism or something like that. It's just that those are mentioned less, and this is very much top of mind kind of response, what they're seeing and hearing on a regular basis. Next, we asked them about overall quality of life. We're at 55% say good. We don't put a value judgment on fair. It's just kind of okay. So you put those together, and it's really strong numbers. The same thing goes with satisfaction with city services, 58%. And then you put that 35% on top of it, and you're in a really amazing place. Here's the way I also explain this. Research is not an academic exercise from a public opinion standpoint. We're Americans, we don't agree on anything. So if we have 55% of us, giving the thumbs up, it's fantastic. And if you add everybody together and you've got 80+% or 90%, it's really off the charts. So these are good numbers. I fully expect if we get to do this next year or in 2 years or 5 years, you'd want kind of an upward trajectory for these numbers. But at the moment, it's a positive place to be, especially in the face of all the negativity we hear about government and economy and inflation and things like that. You're in a strong place. People have an appreciation for what you all do. Next, we asked them if a list of priorities essentially for the city and which are personally important to you. And there's a couple different questions here we'll line up, but this is what's personally important to me. Well, addressing homelessness is, you can see that, maintaining streets and roads right up there. And then there's a little drop off when it comes to sidewalks and neighborhood traffic and things like that. But really, all these things here are very much worth looking at and addressing as policymakers, because this is what they care about, especially those ones that are bunched up in the 50% plus mark. Then we asked them, what are you personally satisfied with? And those numbers drop off significantly, but you get a sense of what they're really happy with, what you're up to, and I kind of said it at the very onset. They're happy with those parks and trails and open space. They want more of it, but they're happy with what you're doing there. They're satisfied. And then you see some other things coming down there. Well, I'll juxtapose those real quick. You'll see this is not the funnest way to look at data, but if it's in the top right side, I'm happy, I'm satisfied, and it's important to me. So you see that's where the parks and trails and open space shows up. But you can see at that bottom right where it's important to me, but I'm not so happy is addressing homelessness. So you can see where those things fall out. And this might be a better way of looking at it. You can see importance in dark blue and light blue satisfaction. You can see those deltas are significant in some places, but you're exceeding things on like special events and festivals. So you can see where you're competing pretty well on parks and trails and open space. But other places it's a little bit off. So communications is kind of interesting because you're doing a lot better than a lot of other communities when it comes to communications. So PIO gets a raise. Nobody paid me for that. All right. And then we ask the voters to rate how well or how poor the city has done with each of the following, and we kind of show them here. Efforts to keep Escondido safe, 34% say good, and then there's fair, and you put those together and you're doing really strong. You can see big majorities there. Obviously, what you'd probably look at here more than anything else is the red, the people who are unhappy with any one of these services, and none of them really stand out tremendously dramatically, except for homelessness. And I don't mean to harp on it in any way, but it's just a number that keeps showing up. But all the other ones you're performing fairly well on. If you were going to address one of the others, maybe it would be streets and sidewalks and things like that, because that stands out a little bit. But for the most part, you've got a good coverage here. Just so you know, this is an executive version. As you may have seen already, there's a version that has all the cross-tabulated data. So you know how people based on age and gender and geography, a district and all that sort of thing understand this data and how they care about things. You can really dive into that, and we're available to speak to that as well. So the city leaders could, if the city leaders could change one thing and make Escondido a better place now and for the future, what would you like to see? And this was an open-ended option, and so there's going to be a lot of variance there. But again, homelessness shows up at the top. It's down actually though from 2022. You can see the lighter color is 2022, the darker color is 2020. 2022. The dark color is 2024. So you see nothing really stands out in a massive way because it's an open-ended question and people just haven't really thought through it. It's probably a good thing. They're not really thinking through that one thing they really need from you. But this is kind of a cool, almost homework list. You get to address each one of these things. If any one of them you can check it off and people will be happier. That was a ton of data, and there's dozens, hundreds of pages behind that. If there's any desire to go into it, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, sir. Any public comments on this item?
None.
Okay, I'll open it up for discussion amongst the council. Go ahead.
Question comes to mind. Thank you for the information. I always appreciate surveys from the community and getting a pulse on also the scientific surveys in addition to what we hear, right, every day. Yeah. So I don't recall the number, but I thought it was close to like 1,000 for our 2022 survey, and this one says 400. Do you know how many we surveyed in the last 2022 versus this one? So it was more.
Okay.
Okay. Is there a reason why we surveyed a lot less people this time?
I don't know the entire purpose of that and the contract behind that.
So it's a different team doing the survey work. We can get you back on, but I think it was also an extended window last time. But
okay.
We were asking very specific questions about putting something on the ballot as well. So, but it's still a significant response for the period of time. But we can get that. Okay,
it would just be good for comparison to kind of understand, because that is a big difference on numbers surveyed.
Yeah.
And then I'm also wondering if this time was, because the other one was a voter one, and it was pretty comprehensive too, I recall. So it would be good to just see the comparison of those two. It would be helpful.
Sure. And just to give you some indication, the utility of a larger number of respondents is very limited from a big picture perspective. If you really wanted to dive into what Latinos thought, or what women with kids over 50 thought, or any of those things, that's where the utility of a bigger completed number of surveys has value. In this case, if you compare the number of respondents to, let's say, 100 other cities that are looking at taxes today, this is the number that they're doing in any other community in the city, in the state.
My question's to the mayor. Since you've been surveyed on every survey we've ever done in the city of Escondido, did you get this one by chance? What a shock. Okay.
Oh.
Do you have anything? Go ahead.
Regarding the cannabis, I have gotten a similar response just in chatting with voters regarding cannabis, and for the most part, people seem to be in agreement. And I said, oh, that's great. Can we put the cannabis retail place right next to your place? And then it's always no. So has there been any discussion or any surveys done on how people feel when it's close in proximity to their place?
So, well, I mean, we've certainly done that kind of research in other parts of the state, and you can imagine the numbers. They're probably not as good specifically. I'm just looking at our list of questions that we had. if anything speaks directly to that. I mean, we had the buffer area at 51% more likely. So, and that did speak to, I think it was schools and preschools or something like that we put there.
But I think I'm going to leave it to the subcommittee members maybe to talk about this, but this was a first conversation to stimulate what questions we might need to ask. So there does appear to be a general appetite for consideration, but that's exactly what I think the next steps needed to be. And again, I don't want to speak for the two subcommittee members, but I think they may. They were asking questions even about the derivation of how many shops we sort of threw into the number, right? There's a retail number and really not a deep dive. This was sort of the first attempt to take the community's pulse, but that's absolutely what a future survey could follow up on and get more nuance about.
Yeah, to that point, after you were done speaking, I was going to request maybe a 12 to 18-month work plan on potentially placing it on the ballot in 2026. I know we had briefly discussed it for 2024, but I don't think there's enough time to, in particular, get more community outreach done. So that was going to be my request of the city manager is to come back with a 12 to 18-month work plan to explore some of this.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And then on page 8, it talks about housing, and disagreement in general seemed to be with development just in general, but it seemed to be positive with workforce housing.
Yes.
Was there any more specifics about the any subcategories that were more prevalent in the disagreement portion of that question or answers that people provided?
I can take a quick look right now and give you that answer. I'm going to spare the room the flashing around. So do you have a number of question that was?
It was on page 8.
Yeah. Does
But-
it say a question number?
I didn't note on my notes that.
Okay, 1 second here. So apologize for the delay. If anyone does have a question number, I can get to it quicker.
Well, my other question was in
Yeah.
regard to the margin of error.
Yes.
I may have read right through it and didn't notice it.
You want me to speak to that?
Well, while you're finding,
So margin of error, I don't think is such a critical number to look at. It's a function of math, so it doesn't change very much based upon the dynamics of what of the survey, other than the number of completed respondents. So it functionally does say that the numbers could variate 5% more or 5% less, but the level of confidence suggests that if we conducted this survey basically, over and over and over again, that these numbers would come back essentially exactly the same 95% of the time. So based upon the size of the number of respondents and the math involved, you should have confidence that these numbers are accurately reflective of today, of the snapshot in time of your likely voters. Yeah.
all right, I'll wait for the rest.
Okay. If you don't mind, since I don't want to belabor it here, if I can get back to you on the conversation about which demographics have more of a motivator or more supportive of the of Measure S or the housing in general, I'd love to get that back to you if I could.
and if there are any subcategories specifically that were in the disagreement, not just that they disagree with it, but I disagree with this type of housing.
Yes, for
Okay?
sure.
Thank you very much.
Well, one of the things that we had entertained is, as a next step, as you heard Adam express, is there's a lot of work to be done if we were going to take on this particular challenge as a city. And I think one of the things would be to do some focus group conversations, looking at the data and bringing focus groups together to understand what their concerns are in a more personal matter, so that we could, as an organization and as a city, address those concerns. But that's going to take a lot of education. The challenge is, generally they know there are issues facing housing and they're supportive of housing. The challenge is exactly how that's going to be implemented to make them assured that it's not going to be disruptive to their neighborhood or particular community. So that was one of the things that I think was evident in the first survey, is that we got a lot more work to do on this particular topic, and having a conversation with the community so that we can get down to really understand what the resistances may be, and what the concerns and fears may be, and address those up front in this process. So Adam's team actually initially proposed, if we're going to go in this space, that we need to do a focus group work. That could be part of the assignment that council maybe wants to follow up on. I will say, in the interim, we've had the city attorney and I've had a call from the state asking some questions about this particular proposition, and they said they were going to be getting back to us shortly as they review it in alignment with some of the state, what the state believes are the directions that we all should be moving in. So there's more to come on that issue, but I think what we can say is we've got to do a lot more education in this space and a lot more understanding of where, to your point, council member, specifically what the concerns are and where those resistances are to that conversation.
So going back to the cannabis thing real quick. So my assumption is, because I was shocked to see that the number one reason to support was because of increased revenue to the city. And do we always talk in gross revenue or net revenue? Because would they have that same response if they said we have a gross increase of $1 million, but a net loss of $1 million because it's going to cost us $2 million in policing?
So obviously we don't get into some of the details there. My understanding, and staff can correct me, is that in the case of cannabis businesses, you charge fees to capture your cost, and taxes are actually, I don't want to get in the middle of this, but yeah. I don't believe that the revenue from taxes are going to specifically augment hard costs. But
exactly.
I could be correct.
And it was somewhat rhetorical, because it's looking at what comes in. It's not looking at what actually has to go out in order to have it a viable business in Escondido. So thank you.
I think in regards to that, what has piqued my curiosity specifically, first off, I think that $1 million number is low. I don't know how they came up with that, but with the city of Vista, last year they brought in, $8 million. So I think that's part of what I would like to look into over the next 12 to 18 months.
And what the chief thinks that his increased staffing needs are going to be, should that?
Well, we're going to have a couple of conversations upcoming about some other programs that are going to need, to your point, Councilmember, that are going to need staffing support. And I think, as the mayor said, that's one of the things we really got to get a better understanding on, is what's the revenue, what are going to be the hard costs associated with managing a program. So what is the net going to be in that conversation?
And I think along those lines, in that, there's what we had just discussed, research, what's going on, I think specifically in North County currently, along with state, federal regulations, local regulations, and then making sure that we have an appropriate amount of public outreach during the process.
Let me piggyback off that. So I think this is really interesting. I think there's, I'm sorry, Mayor, were you done?
You're good.
I think there's we should be looking into this. Obviously, there is an interest by the public. My concern is the same concern that Councilman Marasco has. It's the same thing that's been expressed by Councilman Garcia and the public. But I do think that we need to explore this in more detail. But if we're going to do it, we need to set regulations. So I need to see. I would like to see what kind of regulations we could draft. The other thing is that what I would hate to have is just a concentrated area of cannabis dispensaries. So I would like to set a number, see what that number is, explore, how it is. So a study regarding that. We need environmental reviews, and we just need to adopt regulations and programs that protect the surrounding areas. I know one of the big concerns that a lot of people have had have been schools or anywhere where there's children that are, recreational activities or anything. So we need to ensure that those areas are safe. So I'd like to see studies, see where it is that we could potentially put dispensaries, and if it's limited to certain areas that it wouldn't be effective or we couldn't generate enough revenue, then we need to reconsider it. But I think that there's a lot of work to be done before we even consider putting it in 24, and I think it would be smart for us to, if we were to consider it, look at 26, and I think those are my big concerns.
So I'm hearing that at the point of future agenda in the calendar, you're gonna ask for a work plan.
That'll work.
Absolutely. That is, I guess to put it briefly, yes, that's what I'm looking for.
You have more?
And thank you for the work. I appreciate the study.
you.
Yeah, anybody have anything else? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 10, 5-year capital improvement program and fiscal year 24-25 capital improvement program budget status.
Fee study is actually coming.
Oh, just kidding. Item 9.
Right. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, City Council members. My name is Christina Holmes. I am the Director of Finance. I would also like to introduce Terry Matson, President of ClearSource Financial Consulting, and Robert Rhodes, Assistant Director of Community Services, who will also be presenting this evening. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Terry.
Well, good evening. Thank you for allowing me to participate on this topic. As mentioned, my name is Terry Madsen. I'm here from ClearSource, and our firm helps communities throughout the state with cost of service analysis and establishment of user and regulatory fees to help offset cost of service. So the city is in the final stages of a user and regulatory fee study, and the purpose of this evening is to walk you through findings and some initial outcomes and potential recommendations for the City Council to consider. We have an extensive presentation. I'll make my way very quickly through it because I know you have a full agenda. If you have questions or concerns or want to dive back into an area of particular importance to you, we're happy to do that at the conclusion. By way of agenda, we'll be talking about just background of fee establishment in California, some fundamentals and terminology that is consistent throughout the state, what we're seeing here in Escondido, and then talk through some next steps for the City Council to consider. So just as a reminder, in the city of Escondido, you do review and examine your fees as just part of your standard city operations. This is part of what you do. You typically perform what we would call a comprehensive study every 3 to 5 years, and you do have an established cost recovery policy that says when somebody is a direct receiver of service, we want to consider direct recovery unless we feel like there may be an adverse impact on participation or some conflict with our overall community goals and values. And just as a reminder to the City Council, in broad terms, most of these services are provided out of the city's general fund. So that is how we pay for these services, is they are expensed to the general fund. And frequently what we find is we have sort of unlimited need. We have just a bucket of needs, but we have limited resource. And so what we find is that communities say, with my tax resources that are the primary component of my general fund, I will try to use those tax resources as much as possible to provide broad community-wide services. We most commonly think of this as public safety services, public works services, park maintenance services. And when we find a direct receiver of service, we generally try and find a direct recovery for providing that service so that we can free up our general fund to provide broad community-wide services. That's the idea behind fees and charges, is direct recovery for a direct receiver of service. This slide is really important because I think it's important to note what is not being examined. So in this study, we are not examining taxes, we are not examining utility rates, we're not examining assessments, and we're not examining like infrastructure mitigation fees, development impact fees. Those are separate laws, separate activities, and like things like taxes and utility rates, these are things that we encounter sort of on a day-to-day basis. Instead, we're examining things that are sort of discrete and periodic in nature, like building permit fees, entitlement review fees, engineering fees, and so forth. Another way to phrase it is we're examining service-based fees. Some service is being provided, like permit issuance, plan review, or inspection service. So why do communities like Escondido and other cities in the state, why do we adopt fees, and why do we perform these types of studies on a periodic basis? The number one reason is because we want to conform to legal requirements. The California Constitution and the California Government Code give us some parameters for calculating cost of service and then ultimately setting and establishing fees. We talked about that idea of direct recovery. I want to go to that fourth bullet point because I do think that's an important topic that we haven't covered yet. When we recover our costs of providing services, it helps us continue to meet the service level expectation of the community. So if I'm providing a service, but I'm consistently under recovering for the cost of that service, it might present some challenges for me in order to continue to be able to effectively provide that service. I mentioned that these fees are governed by California Constitution and California Government Code, and those laws direct that fees would be established by the City Council. That's why this topic comes before you. You as a City Council adopt fees and you adjust them as you see fit, as long as we follow some general parameters. This study follows those general parameters. And then one other thing I want to talk about here is the idea of fees really are intended to be dynamic. So you have a fee schedule that has hundreds and hundreds of items, but your organization shifts, the needs of your community shift. And so staff does a great job of thinking about this on an ongoing basis rather than letting it stay stagnant for a decade or something and then reevaluating it. The idea of proactive review and refinement seems to work well for communities. So just very quickly to talk about some concepts and some phrases we use in the reporting we provide to you and then the messaging we provide out to stakeholders in the community. We use phrases like full cost of service, cost recovery, and subsidy over and over and over, and you may use these in your own life, and so we just want to make sure we're speaking consistently here from a fee setting perspective. These are service-based fees, as I mentioned before. So one of the things we're trying to do is identify what is our cost of service. Fundamentally, what we do is we value time. We create what we call a fully burdened rate that thinks about labor, benefits, services and supplies like uniforms, vehicles we use to perform our work, support we receive in order to be able to do our work like IT, finance, HR, and so forth. And then we think about how long does something typically take me to do. So you know that there are some activities that may be very easy and minor in nature and others that are extremely complex. If I want to do a large-scale development, it's a lot different than if I want to re-roof my home, something like that, right? So different costs of service. And so that's what we're doing is working with staff to figure out what is our cost of service. And the cost of service represents your ceiling. That's what a fee can recover. I mentioned that you have an existing cost recovery policy. It seems like a great policy. I just want to go over this concept to say that your cost recovery policy does align to what we see in other communities. And the idea here is that the higher the level of individual benefit, frequently we see the higher the cost recovery targeted. And when there is a hybrid of, yeah, there is an individual that's receiving benefit from maybe participating in this program, but there's also a community benefit from having people actively engaged in our community and so forth. Like a good example might be swim lessons. So when I take a swim lesson and I learn to swim, I absolutely benefit as an individual from that swim lesson. But as a community, we may say, we as a community also benefit from a safety perspective, from a life skills perspective, from a confidence perspective, all sorts of things. So when we see like a community good and an individual good, we frequently have lower cost recovery levels versus if I want to remodel my kitchen. I am the beneficiary of that remodel. I get to enjoy it. I get to experience the increased property value that comes from that remodel and so forth. And so for the most part, communities typically target high cost recovery levels because they say, we want you to pay for your own remodel that you're going to benefit from instead of having you and the neighbors pay for the remodel. Because when we target less than full cost recovery, you still incur the costs, but it's coming in part from the applicant and part from city funds. And that's the idea of this slide. If we have a service that, let's say, costs the city, let's just say it costs the city $1,000 to perform a service, but we recover $500 from the receiver of service, the city of Escondido still had a cost of $1,000, but we would say you have partial cost recovery. $500 came from the applicant, the receiver of service, and the other $500 had to come from some other Escondido revenue source, and that's typically your property tax dollars, your sales tax dollars, and so forth. So that is common to every city in the state of California, and it's just fundamentally how we establish cost of service and how we think about fees in California. Now we'll think specifically about Escondido and what we're seeing, and we'll break the world into two primary worlds, sort of like what we would consider regulatory fees, non-discretionary fees that are governed by your own municipal code or California building code or California government code or so forth, and then what we call user fees, which are more discretionary in nature. On the regulatory side, your primary regulatory fees, I mentioned there for things like plan review, permit issuance, inspection services, and you think of these as building, planning, engineering, fire prevention when we're out reviewing construction for compliance with fire code and so forth, operations for compliance with fire code. These fees, because they're regulatory in nature and there is a clear receiver of benefit, the idea is that these fees would be generally proposed to target full cost of service. That's consistent with what we see in other communities. You also have what we would consider user fees or discretionary fees like swim program fees, facility rental fees, and so forth. And the idea here is that right now, you recover less than your full cost of service for these programs, and that is also consistent with the state of California because of the idea of we do see that idea of community good along with individual benefit and an overarching goal of program participation and engagement in the community, hoping to foster sort of like indirect effects that lead to broad community good. In the recreation and user fee type world is the same idea, but they frequently express it as a pyramid where high individual benefit, high cost recovery, entirely community benefit, very low cost recovery. Something like an entirely community benefit that we might see as an example might be if you put on a like a special event for Christmas, like a downtown Christmas parade or a 4th of July fireworks show or something like that, and you say, come, anybody is welcome, there is a cost to the city, but you may not have an entry fee because you've decided this is just a community good and we have zero cost recovery, even though you did incur a cost of service. That would be an example at the low end of the spectrum. So when we think about fiscal impact of what is being proposed, remember there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fees because you're trying to contemplate all of the scenarios that could walk in the door at Escondido, and some of them may not come in this year and some of them may come in over and over. So for the city council, we've documented sort of every line item for your consideration, but in this presentation, we've aggregated it by what we consider fee category: building fees, planning fees, engineering, and so forth. And what we see is, we would say the city's cost of performing fee-related services is in the neighborhood of $12.8 million a year. That's the left-hand column at the bottom. So building costs about $2.8 million, current planning $1.2 million, and so you just go right down the line, and we'd say you have about a $12.8 million cost of service, and today, under your existing fee schedules and your existing development patterns and so forth, you bring in about $8 million in fee revenues. And so what we would say is there is a general fund subsidy of about $5 million, and you have overall cost recovery levels of about 61%. This is consistent with what we see in other communities. So the idea that you have been examining your fees has put you in a position where you can make modifications to recalibrate your cost of service, but the idea of getting to full cost recovery is an unrealistic scenario because of your recreation programming. So here is the idea behind a potential adjustment for city council consideration, and this would align to what we see in other communities and what we think might work for Escondido. And the idea here is that you would have an adjustment to your cost recovery levels where you'd take building to full cost recovery and you'd start moving the regulatory fees towards full cost recovery via a multi-year phase-in pattern. And the idea is that if you made these types of adjustments, we think there would be about $1.3 million in additional general fund revenues after these fees go into effect. And just as a reminder here, these would be to offset existing costs of service. So it's not service level enhancements, it's offsetting costs that we believe already exist. And so that would be this year one trend. But there are some areas where you have lower cost recovery levels than others. And so you say, hey, it's not unreasonable for me to target full cost recovery or generally full cost recovery levels for current planning fees like site plan review, use permitting, and so forth. But I may not be able to get there overnight without making some sort of magnitudinal fee changes. And so you can see here is a multi-year recommendation where you'd say over a 3-year window, I would move myself to full cost recovery in the regulatory fee world, but in those categories where I have significant under recovery, I would get there over a 3-year window rather than overnight. But that's what this chart is showing, is the idea is to get to full cost recovery in several of these categories, and tailor it to foster community collaboration and sort of get a feel for the community feedback from a proposed changes on a year-to-year basis. If you did follow this pattern, what we anticipate is in that initial year, so that initial adjustment would result in about a $1.3 million increase. That's what we mentioned to you. And that would continue as long as your development patterns remain the same, your demand remain the same, and so forth. So that would continue. But as you phased in your enhanced cost recovery, you would see a little bit more than that in the future years, we believe. So a $1.3 million in the upcoming year would turn to $1.6 million, and the subsequent year would turn to $2 million in the following year as you phased in that cost recovery. So a net change of about $375,000 additional dollars per year. I mentioned that in the initial year, we would hope that the general fund impact would be about 1.27, and the idea is that it's to offset costs that you already reasonably anticipate incurring. One of the things that council frequently asks is, if I said yes to this proposed scenario, how would I align to the region? Would I be saying yes to something that, even if mathematically it makes sense, it positions me as some sort of regional outlier? We mentioned several times that you have so many different fee categories that you can't realistically compare all of them. Instead, what we do is we grab a handful of categories that sort of appear from agency to agency to agency, and we compare those to give us a sense of where you stand in the region. And one of the things we do is we also think about where you stand amongst similar populations. So maybe sometimes in the Central Valley, you might see something that's very unique to the Central Valley, but uncommon in the rest of California. And so what we do is, in Escondido, we thought, well, let's think about populations in excess of 100,000 outside of this particular area. Let's think about Northern California, Central California, but 100,000 plus, so that just see what else is out there. So we tried hard to think through a reasonable fee comparison. And I'll show you a handful of slides now, and then we're getting towards the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. But this next group of slides is showing you various building permit scenarios, and this is a frequently compared fee because it's a high volume fee, building permitting. And what we're going to show you is 5 slides that work in, what they do is they grow in project complexity. So a $25,000 project is a minor project. Then we'll show you a $50,000, $100,000, $500,000, $1 million project, and so forth. They grow in complexity. But over and over, you're going to see a similar pattern that Escondido seems to be at the lower end of the region. And you can adjust your fees without positioning yourself as a regional outlier or an outlier in terms of what we see for similar populations. And one note is that when we considered your neighbors, what we saw was, we think Poway's last significant fee update might have been in 2014, so about a decade ago. We think San Marcos's most recent significant update of development fees was about 20 years ago, and we think Vista annually updates their fees to align to regional cost inflation. So here, all I'm showing you is Escondido's in this red bar. The lower of the Escondido is your current, the higher of the Escondido is your proposed, and I'm just going to go project, same pattern, $50,000 project. Now you get into a $100,000 project, and what you're seeing is almost everyone is within a couple $100 of each other at that mid-range of the spectrum, but Escondido today is significantly lower than that. Same thing here, you're looking at a $500,000 project, so this is a fraction. Your building permit fee would be a fraction of your total project cost, but what we see is it's a few $100s from agency to agency in terms of what the permit fee might be. And then in a $1 million project, same concept. Low today, mid-range tomorrow if the council decided to adjust fees to what you're seeing in this initial packet. Next, we'll talk about some other categories of fees that are frequently compared. The idea of appeal fees. Sometimes councils decide to subsidize appeals where they might only get a handful a year, but they say, I want to not make it prohibitive for somebody to appeal or something like of that nature. And so what you find is appeals, they are expensive. If you do get one, it's expensive to process because there's a lot of city resources involved. You use technical expertise and so forth. So here what you see is Escondido's current appeal fee is actually near the upper range of what we saw in terms of this comparison, and so there is not an immediate adjustment proposed. But if you did propose to move yourself to full cost recovery, that orange bar shows you what you would take yourself to if you said, I want to get there sort of overnight. Variance, what you're seeing here is an initial adjustment, and then this would be like a phased in fee. Same concept here. This is a more significant type of variance, where right now you're just a little bit at the lower end of the spectrum. You could adjust your fee without making you an outlier. Zone change is a fee we can see from agency to agency. So you're just seeing these consistent patterns of I am at the lower to mid-range, and I'm trying to keep myself in that mid-range, but still, this was not my influencer. My influencer was what is Escondido's cost of service, and then after the cost of service was identified, it was compared against these other agencies.
Ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
Were you instructed specifically that the Escondido does not want to be an outlier and we want to be somewhere in the middle compared to everyone else?
No.
So that's your assumption?
Totally. And,
Okay.
And so, absolutely, I just would say that it's my general preamble that sometimes councils ask if I thank you, they say, thank you so much for this analysis. If I adopted it, would I become a regional outlier? And so we always operate under the assumption of provide some comparison information, but no, I was not instructed.
Okay, thank you.
So, and the other thing just to remind is that we actually use actual costs to calculate these fees, right? So we're not necessarily chasing that outlier. I'm not sure why some of those fees are as high as they are. There may be some costs that's other cities that are higher than our costs, but they're actually looking at actual costs to develop the fee, right? So while I hear the question, I also want to re-emphasize to the community, these are the actual costs in these fees that we're proposing to recover, right? And what it doesn't include, though, is expansion of services, right? So that, if we were instructed to come back to expand services, we might have a slightly different conversation. And that might be something the council wants us to consider for next year. So the city manager would be open for that recommendation, but right now this is the cost recovery for the existing service level that we're providing.
And so, council member, this is a good example where as just in theory, if you said, I'm not only not interested in being a regional outlier, I'd be totally comfortable with being at the upper, just in theory. You say, I'd be comfortable being at the upper end of the spectrum, and I see no reason why we shouldn't just match Costa Mesa for this illustration. We would say, our analysis wouldn't indicate that you could match them. Our analysis would indicate that your cost of service is in the $6,000 range, and so that would be your maximum fee. And your maximum fee is how your cost of service represents your maximum fee. Just because you have an appetite for something higher than that doesn't mean that we could support it.
But if you wanted to provide us instruction to pursue the fee at the full cost recovery, staff would still recommend phasing that in, but we'd be willing to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So as Terry mentioned, within the recommended fee schedule, there are certain fees that are not targeting full cost recovery. So I'm going to hand it over to Robert Rhodes, Assistant Director of Community Services, who's going to review the Community Services and Recreation Program fees. And then I'm going to talk about in a little more detail the Overstreet banner hanging program.
Thank you, Christina. Just for the record, again, my name is Robert Rhodes. I'm the Assistant Director of Community Services. It's a pleasure to be here tonight to discuss our recommendations and just to share some information about the Community Services fee structure. So one of the first steps that we did in this particular process was to really look at and realign our user classifications currently. So at the moment, we do have 5 user groups, and they are Class A through Class E. And the groups are, these classifications determine the proposed fees specifically for rental space. And I'd like to go over those right now with you in reverse order. So at the moment, Class E is for commercial groups and non-Escondido residents, and they would in theory be paying the full cost associated with that particular rental. Our Class D is specifically for Escondido residents, and so we would base the fee on that full Class E rate and then provide them with approximately 10% discount from that full price. Our Class C is for non-Escondido nonprofits and not-for-profit organizations, and then those would receive a 20% discount on that full Class E price. Class B is for Escondido-based nonprofits and government agencies, and they would be receiving a 30% discount on that full price. And then finally, Class A is the City of Escondido programming or city-sponsored event, which at this point in time would receive no costs. Part of the reason for that realignment and reclassification is that it simplifies and standardizes a lot of our approach to this process. Previously, what we had found in the fee structure was that there was no specific uniformity within that. We had noticed that at similar spaces across different facilities, one user group might receive a 20% discount, whereas another, that same user group, if they went to another facility, a very similar space, may receive a 70% user discount. So it was important for us to go forward to be able to standardize that process. So based on this new kind of methodology and approach that we are taking, essentially we are going to be increasing those user fees for Class B, Class C, and Class D, which ultimately results in our staff recommending that we maintain no changes for the Class E levels of pricing for the coming year, and then reevaluating those rental fees for fiscal year 26 to give those groups that fall within those those other classes, B through D, an opportunity to acclimate to the new pricing structure. Furthermore, staff is also recommending that some of the program fees adjustments for 24-25 within the annual fee review, and then based a little bit later on, potentially on market pricing, CPI, and cost recovery targets should they be implemented. So right now I'd like to go through a couple of examples of some where some of our cost recovery at full cost recovery may not be the most ideal based on that user pyramid that Terry had talked about previously. It was that where there would be more greater community benefit. So right now I'd like to start with the Learn to Swim class, since that was used earlier as an example. And you will note that the current fee is approximately $40 for that program, wherein the cost of service that is incurred by our department is right now $449 to be able to do that. Yet that does not include the costs associated with pool maintenance that is specifically performed by our Public Works Department. If that was to be included, that would then significantly increase the full user cost for that particular program. However, it should be noted that the average cost of swim lessons among the 5 North County cities that we did survey for this process was approximately $45. And therefore, at this point in time, staff would be recommending that we do move up to that North County average for that program. The next example I'd like to highlight at this point are the user fees for our ball field lights. Currently, the city charges our recognized youth groups or youth leagues $5 per hour. However, the cost of operation ranges between anywhere from $24 to actually $45 an hour, depending on whether or not those lights are LEDs or halogen bulbs. And currently, we do only have one set of ball fields that are LEDs, and that is at Jesmond Dean Park. So the cost of service in general does include the lighting management system. We use Musco, and they're the ones that are responsible for assisting us in making sure the lights come on, come off, as well as working with the leagues to set those particular schedules. However, it does not include lighting maintenance or replacement bulbs or other supplies that are also provided by the Public Works Department. So one of the interesting things that when, again, we were surveying kind of some of those other North County cities is that there was a pretty significant variable range. There was one city that did charge $5 per hour for lights, which is the city of Carlsbad. However, they have approximately just a couple of fields that they actually do lighting. To where we would have the City of Oceanside on their fee schedule indicates full cost recovery. The last time we surveyed about 2 years ago on this particular item, at that time, Oceanside was charging $22 per hour for the usage of lights. So they've since gone to full cost recovery. So if it's similar to ours, our costs associated with that, they'd be charging anywhere from that $24 to $45 per hour approximately. Well, in the process for us to be able to kind of look at what that gap is for those particular lighting fees, staff is recommending that we do increase the cost of lighting to approximately $10 per hour. So in preparation for this possible change, we did have conversations with our leagues back in December of 2023 to essentially have that conversation with them to allow them to understand that this was potentially coming and this was going to be a recommendation that we were going to have.
And what was their response to that?
I was just going to say. So what was interesting is that there was no significant concerns about that. So since we were not promoting a change in other fee areas, they were comfortable with that and they understood the increase of costs associated with the lighting the ball field. So even though their costs increased by 100%, there was no significant issues with that. And then finally, I just wanted to provide an example as far as a facility rental is concerned. This particular one is for the Vineyard Room at the East Valley Community Center. We do currently rent this out for $80 an hour under our Class E rate. Whereas the cost of service for this particular space is approximately $147 per hour. What this includes for us is this includes the event staffing, so staff that are there in the facility to overseeing. It also includes staff time working with the renter to schedule that specific space, any type of basic supplies that might be required as a part of that process, and then amortize replacement costs for like the projectors, screens, things like that, as well as building maintenance and utilities. So that total cost, again, is $147 an hour. So what was interesting is that rather than reaching out to our other local municipalities, we decided to do just a quick check of the average area market rental rates, and they're going for approximately $340 an hour. But this is specifically for event rentals. What we do find with regard to the space over at the East Valley Community Center in the Vineyard Room, that is not typically what that is used for. That is actually typically used as a meeting space for small church groups, school groups, and HOAs. So what we looked into is to see what other spaces were potentially available for them, and those spaces ranged from free of charge to a very nominal fee. So at this time, the staff is recommending that we do maintain that $80 an hour as the Class E rate, which the bulk of our rentals in that space are actually B and C. And once we have established this new update for this user classification, those rates will go up to either the 20 or the 30% discount from that standard rate. We would then be recommending that we reevaluate all of our pricing starting in fiscal year 26. And again, we would look at doing the standardization going forward and matching our facilities. So if the square footage at one of our, let's say the Park Avenue Community Center is very similar to the square footage of the East Valley Community Center for a specific room, those rates would be standardized and made similar. And then from there, we would look at what those charges were based on the potential market rate currently. And that is all the information I have at this point on the user fees for community services.
Thank you. Lastly is one fee we did want to bring to your attention this evening. It's the Overstreet Banner Hanging Program. So currently the city has a permitting process that allows organizations in the city to advertise public events by hanging a straight banner. These are located at Washington Avenue between Escondido Boulevard and Center City Parkway, and Broadway between Valley Parkway and Washington Avenue. In 2023, the city hung 11 banners. 8 were from outside agencies, and 3 were for city-held events. So the current permit fee is $40. Due to the type of boom trucks required to remove and install street banners, the Public Works tree crew and electricians are utilized to remove and install these banners. So the fully burdened hourly rate for this staff process is approximately $1,000. In fiscal year 2023, city staff did do an RFP and bid proposal process to contract for these services. However, the contract price that we received to remove and install each street banner is $1,200. So the recommendation may be to discontinue the service in the future, but in this transitional year, the staff recommendation for this fee is to increase to $100. So that concludes our presentation. So this evening we are requesting City Council provide feedback and direction regarding the recommendations in the fee study. With Council's direction to move forward, we will bring the fee schedule for adoption as part of the operating budget public hearing on June 19th. And then the following fiscal year, with the adoption of the fiscal year 2026 budget, staff will return to City Council with a review of CPI and those recommended increases that Terry mentioned earlier to get gradually closer to full cost recovery for those particular categories of fees. That concludes our presentation.
Any public comments? Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. This is just one man's opinion, right? And so you're just looking for feedback, correct? So I'm just going to provide feedback. Our goal should be full cost recovery across the board, everywhere, anywhere, and everywhere that we can. I recognize that people don't want to pull the Band-Aid off, but when we're talking about the fiscal challenges that the city is under, I don't want to see this prolonged. I want to see it happen sooner rather than later. And I don't accept the thought that it's impossible to have full cost recovery in recreational or other areas. And I think what we're doing right now, the subsidizing that we're doing is grossly detrimental to the city of Escondido and our budget, and that we need to be looking at this in a much more progressive and aggressive manner. I don't care what the rest of the state or what the rest of the area is doing. I think what we need to do is do what's best for the city of Escondido. Everyone's heard, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. We've been doing this exact same thing for how many years, decades, whatever, and the results have always been the same. We're losing money. We can't keep losing money. We have to pull off the Band-Aid, and we have to stop this as soon as possible. 3 years with a staggered program to get us back into a normal range is longer than I'd like to see. It's probably what we have to do. But by the time we hit that 3-year mark, we're going to be completely out of whack again as compared to where everyone else is. So we can't just do it as genteel as possible. I think we're at the time where we have to look at things and be progressive. I'm not saying I want us to be outliers, but there's only, in every single example that was shown there, even if we added the orange bar in, we'd be an outlier in one of those categories. So we have room for increasing our fees. We need to increase our fees. The appeals number, if you could go back to that one as an example, and probably the appeals, variances, and CUPs, I think I don't agree with keeping our fees the same. I think that we need to be more aggressive with our appeals. If we're utilizing the attorneys more, if we're utilizing staff more, we need to charge for what we're actually doing. The variance, if you could go to the variance as well. Even if we were to go to the full potential amount, we're at $6,000, we're still below other areas, And trust me, these other folks are going to be catching up, and they're going to be increasing their fees as well. The CUP, if you could go to the CUP. Again, that's the one outlier that if we were to go the full amount, we would be creating the outlier. So we need to do something. We need to increase it. But again, I don't feel like we need to hesitate in pushing the envelope in these things right now. The Learn to Swim is, that's great. That's it's beneficial to the individuals and to the families. I don't necessarily agree that we need to be so overly concerned about the overall community benefit from that, because I think we need to start charging what it's costing us and not what makes us feel good. So I wouldn't accept this increase from $40 to $45. In my mind, it could easily go to $65, and people are still going to pay for it. If you can go to the next one, the lights on the ball field, charge $25 an hour. $5 an hour is silly. Charge $25 an hour, and they're going to pay for it. The leagues and everyone, they're going to pay for it because they want to continue, and we can't keep subsidizing at the rate that we've been subsidizing. It just doesn't work. The rentals, charge $140 an hour to rent it. It's significantly less than what's happening out in the community, and people will still be getting a discount off of that, based upon what type of group might be utilizing that facility for the services. But again, doing what might make us feel good is not going to take care of the budget deficits that we have, and we need to be as aggressive and progressive as we possibly can. You use the banner example where it's near full cost recovery. That makes sense. So you say that, well, we may not even do this program anymore, but if we charge this, we may continue to do the program. Well, that same philosophy, from my perspective, holds true for everything that we've discussed this evening. It's like, okay, we either don't provide it or we try to increase the cost to the point where it's feasible for us to provide it and not have significant losses. Those are my opening comments. I may have more after I hear what you all have to say, but I apologize. But again, that's one man's opinion.
No, I tend to agree with most of what Councilmember Morosco said. I do think we need to be a bit more aggressive. I do understand that there is community benefit in some things, but I wonder what the benefit to the community is to be so heavily subsidizing things that we're left with a deficit in other areas. I do think that we need to be charging full cost for everything that we do. I recognize that some of this gets to full cost over a couple years. I'm okay with that, but I think the more aggressive we can be in the beginning, the better off that the city of Escondido will be. So.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I'll start with this one because this one was one that shocked me with what it costs to put up a banner. So I'll just say that I really appreciated the presentation. It really helped. There was a lot of numbers in the staff report, and this made it so much more clear and easy to understand. So I really appreciate that. So yeah, for like the street banner hanging, I think. I can't imagine any organization would be able to pay that much for a banner that stays up for. I'm not sure how many days.
You real quick, because I have a question right along with that.
Can I finish? Yeah. Can I finish?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know how long for like this fee. Like, what's the time that they hang this? Is it like for a week or?
And can they hire a third party to do it, or does the city have to do it?
Hi.
So, good evening. I'm Joe Gillard, your Director of Public Works. So we hang them for 14 days. So
okay.
In the application, they're hung for 14 days.
Got it. Thank you. So something like this to me seems first of all, like ridiculous amount of money for a banner that doesn't stay up very long. You have to pay to print the banner, and then it's kind of a waste because you only use it for 2 weeks. And I'll just say that I think there's better ways to advertise community events where more people would see it and it wouldn't cost as much. And I also think shutting down the street to put up a sign, it just doesn't seem like the best approach. So I just want to say I would love for us to explore a different way to advertise community events that's not as expensive, and also maybe has more publicity and doesn't shut down our street. So, I very much favor exploring other ways to advertise community events. I've seen, for some example, when I'm in San Marcos, right off the 78 freeway, they have like a sign in the median that shows what's coming up in their events. Other communities have similar things in the median, or public spaces that the city can easily change out events. Were you going to say something?
No.
Okay. So yeah, I just think that is just, we're subsidizing something that in reality I think is just too expensive anyway, and there's better alternatives, I think, that we can explore. So I would be okay with exploring a different, sunsetting this and finding an alternative. As far as increasing fees, we do need to recover fees, and I totally understand that argument. I do think, though, giving people notice and doing it in phases is more sustainable, because we also, a lot of the people who use these services, and I'm thinking more like maybe the swim or the recreation, don't have a lot of funds, and it's the way that they can actually enjoy something. So it is something that we should be helping families that can't afford things. So so that's my thought on just like phasing it. Can we go back to I think it was like the CUP, the appeals, that one? Yeah, and I agree. I think for the one that stays the same, is that the CUP one or the appeals? There was one that my colleague was saying they shouldn't say, this one, yeah. Yeah, I think we should increase it, not keep it the same. So I would be in favor of increasing that. Again, I'm more in favor of the, phasing approach. To getting the fees. And I appreciate, Robert, that you proactively engaged the leagues, the baseball leagues, and said, hey, this is coming up. Because I think it's important for us to communicate to our community, the cost of things and like what our issues are. Not everyone knows that we're in a budget deficit. I wish they did, but not everyone does. And so I think it's very important for us to have conversations with our community, explain to them, how much things cost, and like, hey, this is coming down the pipeline. Similar to what we did with that Tiny Tots program. Instead of shutting it down that year, we said, hey, we're giving you a 1 year's notice, this is coming. And it prepares the community. So I feel like they're not gonna be happy that the fees go up, but at least if we give them a heads up, I think it'll help us. And we're still accomplishing the goal of recovery of fees. I think there was also mention of CPI, right? And one of if we can go to that slide that talks about the comparisons of the cities and how long, when it was the last time they did their fee study. It was early on in the presentation. Yeah, so I would be also in favor of having a way to include CPI, because that allows us to adjust annually, and then it's not a surprise. So that's where I'm at now. I would say for some of the fees like appeals, the CUP, I would be okay with those increasing more. Sunsetting this banner program and finding a better way that's affordable to the community but still gets the word out about community events and doesn't shut down our streets. That's why it's so expensive in the equipment that is used. And then I'm in favor of a tiered approach and noticing the public, hey, this is what's going to happen and this is what you can expect. And as far as recreation, I would say I'm not at the full cost recovery for that. I don't believe, because then I believe that makes it inaccessible. And it does have a community benefit. And I also believe, because of who lives in Escondido and our demographics, like equity is important, making sure that communities that can't afford organized sports, them having access to recreation, them having things to do to keep them out of gangs after school, that's a community benefit to all of us. So if we were to do full cost recovery on that, that would be detrimental to our community. So on the recreation side, I would not support full cost recovery, but I would support those incremental increases. That's what I have to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you for the work. I really appreciate everything that you've done and the approach that you took as well. I think it makes sense. It's logical. I'm going to kind of echo on what all my colleagues have said. So the ball fields, the rentals, the community rentals, the increase of the appeals. I think there are a lot of things that we can consider in terms of full cost recovery. I think that would be fair. And then what I would like to see, though, to the point that Councilman Roscoe said is we can't be revisiting this every 10 years and then catching up in 10 years and catching it up. So what I would like to also consider is what we're looking at in terms of like what Vista's doing and increasing it. Once we get to the goal, is increasing it at the cost of inflation or something similar, where we can, even if it's slightly above, so that we can incrementally catch up, and we don't have to do this every 10 years and make drastic changes. And even if we do look at it, revisit it in 5 years, 10 years, well, it's going to be slight adjustments, and it's not going to have this sticker shock that I think a lot of people are having. So I do think we need to be more aggressive, but we could be more aggressive, but at the same time also just phase it a little bit more so that people aren't taking that shock. So I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Well, I must say that this was definitely very eye-opening, and I thank staff and all those involved in bringing this forward. A couple of questions I have, or a few questions. And when it comes to some of the fee schedules regarding non-profs and Escondido-based and non-Escondido-based non-profs, thinking about faith-based organizations that may be renting some of our facilities, in regard to faith-based organizations, many times headquarters is out of the city. I pastored a church in Escondido. We were here, but yet our headquarters is in Riverside. So if there was any insurance, or there is a requirement for insurance, that's coming from out of the area in the name of the headquarters. So where does that put us? That would be considered an Escondido-based non-prof, or all of a sudden now it's a non-Escondido-based non-prof?
Thank you, Councilmember Garcia. It's an excellent question, and I apologize if I wasn't really clear in my presentation. As a faith-based organization that is a nonprofit, they would be a Class B organization, because one of the things that is required is that they would have to have at least 75% of their membership as residents within the city of Escondido. And if it's, let's say, for example, like you mentioned, potentially a national organization, let's say the American Red Cross, if they had a branch office that was located in Escondido, they would qualify under that proposal.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I think that we do need to, our increases, I think, should be stepped in order to be able to reach a more reasonable and amount of fee, because we are in certain cases very, very far behind. I think it's easier, more palatable for organizations to take that on as a faster increase than it would be for individuals. One of the things that really shocked me was the Learn to Swim. The $449 that appears cost of service for the city, and that's per swimmer?
That is correct. That would be per swimmer. The way that that particular fee was calculated is that the individual that is taking the class has a water safety instructor that is present. In addition to that, we have 2 lifeguards that are on deck that are required. We also have a head guard that is present for rotations. And then we also have the oversight of our pool manager and our aquatic supervisor. So all of that is taken into consideration.
And do we have numbers for if it included pool maintenance?
I would have to refer you to Director Gallart for that one.
Okay. So this is in essence, wouldn't be a full 100% cost recovery, the 449, because we're not including the pool maintenance cost?
That those costs would be reflective of just the fees incurred, for the cost of service incurred by the Community Services Department.
Okay, by the Community Services Department. Okay. So I actually have somebody taking a class this summer. And when I filled out the form, $40, wow, that is very inexpensive. I thought it would be more. Okay. But if it said $450, I'd say, oh, wow, that's nice. I hope you don't drown. Because I think that's probably the point of, at least in regard to this, the community benefit for me is that we can actually save a life. And having been a chaplain with the police department for over 17 years here in Escondido, I have had to deal with 2-year-olds that have drowned. So this is really tough, but I also heard my colleagues mention $65 things. I think those are more aggressive than what's being proposed, but I also think that they're more, it doesn't become cost prohibitive at 65 or something like that. At 450, it does become definitely cost prohibited. So that.
Can I ask a question?
Certainly.
Why? Because I meant to ask this. Do we have any like nonprofits or anything that do something similar like this in Escondido? Do you guys know that it wouldn't be $450 or $40?
I'm not aware of any, but that does not mean that we do not. There is a nonprofit that during Water Safety Day that was out. It was in honor of her daughter who actually drowned, but they do not run like programming or classes. Their job was, as part of their nonprofit, was to bring awareness to drowning, water safety, so on.
I'd be curious to know if we have other alternatives, and if that's the case, then we could phase this out, or even, by default, put it 450 and then have. But if we don't have that option, it would be really difficult to phase it out. Thank you.
And what are the costs in other areas for this particular type of class?
I'm sorry, could you rephrase that? I didn't.
How much do Learn to Swim costs, or do they even offer it in San Marcos, in Vista?
With regard to other cities. So the city of San Marcos charges $40 for their Learn to Swim program. Poway charges $62. The city of Vista charges $55. The city of Oceanside charges $40, and the city of Carlsbad charges $28.
And do we have any idea if their costs are similar to what our cost would be?
I would imagine they would be. They would have to have a water safety instructor present for the safety of anybody who's participating in the pool. You would need a minimum of 2 guards that would be present on deck at all times, and then you would have to have a guard that would rotate out. So you're looking at an additional 3rd guard. So I would say my guess would be they would need to be very similar to ours.
This is state mandated?
What's that?
These are state mandated regulations that you have to have all those?
You do not actually technically have to have 2 guards. We do that for safety purposes. You actually have to have 1 guard present on deck.
Based upon state regulations?
Correct.
So all the private swim classes and all the different organizations that are in Escondido, in and around the area, they don't have 5-6 different managerial oversight individuals doing that?
Correct. Right. There's different regulations, and it has to do with posted signs and placards, and we do not have that at our pool.
Signs and placards?
Correct.
Wouldn't that be cheaper than having?
It would be significantly cheaper, I'm sure, but it would also be significantly riskier.
All right. So I think there are moments in which we are going to become we'll get full cost recovery, and I think there are some other programs that we likely are not going to. And the reality is that I don't see how we could phase something like this out and at the same time verbalize that we're for the community and to be safe. So this is one of those that I think just, yeah, we need to be a little more aggressive, but I don't see us getting anywhere close to $450 per swimmer. Anyway, those are my comments, and I appreciate opening our eyes, and I think this will provide a good opportunity for the community and for us to be able to engage with the community and say, well, this is actually what's costing the city. So this is where your tax dollars are going. And then they can provide us with some guidance too, some direction. Thank you.
Quick question for City Manager. Would there be any benefit in analyzing what our models are for some of these programs?
So let me put something. I mean, this is the most comprehensive we've been in this conversation, to my knowledge. It's an important conversation to have. Again, as was pointed out, we're facing some very severe financial challenges down the line. It's important to communicate what costs are to actually put on these programs. What I think the struggle is everybody's learning. So one of the questions that I'm gonna have a couple of questions, because I'm trying to get to a point where we can bring back something that has council's at least initial direction on, so that we can bring back something that for the public hearing. What I'm hearing is that there's a general consensus that we need to keep pace with costs. So the staff would likely be bringing back something that included CPI and its formula so that we're not in some of these conversations on an ongoing basis, so that when we do the analysis, we can do that. I'm hearing it's okay to make a step into. Can we take a break for just a second? I'm getting a call from my son, so I'd just like to take that call, and we'll come back.
Take a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
Okay. You were talking about recommendations. I was going to say, it sounds like we're all in agreement that anything that has more of an individual benefit, we're okay coming out of the gate a little bit more aggressive. And the things that have more of a community benefit, it sounds like we're all okay with some increase and potentially getting more aggressive over time. But like I said, especially with the individual stuff.
So let me ask a formational question around that. There's a difference between maybe charging rental charges and charging for programming. If we were to take a look at the rental charges more in alignment with what's going on, would that be a fair place to make some headway on rental charges? So, for example, on the lighting issue, we could be prepared to say it's going to be $10 an hour this year, but we're going to full cost recovery next year, right? So, and then similar with rental charges, we're going to be looking at full cost recovery for rental charges as long as that doesn't put us outside of the marketplace with the discounts that were aligned. And then we can come back and maybe have a more structured conversation about the programming. So hard costs in the rental space, to a space where we're now going to move to get more cost recovery, but notify the groups that we're going to go to full cost recovery for those costs, unless that place is somehow outside the marketplace, and then come back to council to have more directed conversations about programming in its costing, and where we could go, which would also be maybe looking at the marketplace of just cities and potentially approaching that to be unafraid to ask the question about charging what the market is charging right now in that space. Then on the is that a fair place to start?
I'm good, but I heard buttons clicking behind me, so.
Well, I would like to see a little bit, I don't want us to be at no increases on the programming. I think we have some room for some increases on the programming.
Well, and I think we are proposing generally increases in the programming. If not, we'll go back and we'll make sure there is increase in programming, and then we can get a more market-based and what we're looking for each programming.
But I like what you're saying overall with everything, whether it's rentals or programmings or anything, is that we're letting people know. Folks, just so you know, this is the increase this year, but it's going to be more. So people can prepare.
And I think eventually, if there is an additional revenue in the city, there are going to be to provide programming or any of these types of things, there's going to need to be substantial increases.
Exactly.
So if I'm trying to get a sense of whether that was an acceptable pathway for a proposal.
I just had one comment, because you touched on something that I didn't get to cover.
Yeah.
Can we go back to the rental fees? I forgot to comment on that one. And just wanted to say, let's see. So city cost of service 147, still significantly lower than the market rate. Just something that I have observed, and I've heard it a lot, is I know in some places like the county library in San Marcos, nonprofits are free, right? We don't have anything that's like free to nonprofits or residents in Escondido. So that's just been something that I've heard for many years, is it's hard to find meeting space in Escondido that's affordable. So I just wanted to say that, I understand that, increasing our fees. And I'm glad that still our cost of service is significantly less than the market rate, because I do think that this is a huge need in the community. And I don't know if I guess I also would love for to know if you are aware of any organizations that maybe have rental space available that would be lower than this, because there is a need for community meet in places that are affordable or free, and I just don't see that we have any of those in Escondido. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the city, but it would be good to have those, knowing if they exist, similar to what I heard about like the programs, right? At one point I know YMCA had I think a swim program or a pool program, and hopefully, I don't know if that's going to come back online eventually or not, but that's a potential future conversation. So yeah, just wanted to say that I do think this is a gap in our community of affordable to even free, which I know, it's hard to have for the city, but nonprofits or churches, if you have space for community to meet, reach out, because that's definitely a need in the community. And so yeah, just to kind of reiterate, because I know I think we are on the same page for lots of things, especially like the CUP, right? So making sure there's increase, but then phasing. I think a majority of us are like phasing, and then I would like to maybe have the conversation on recreation be like its own conversation, if possible, because I think that one is a little more nuanced conversation for me.
And I'm just looking for some direction from the council so I can bring back a proposal.
I think we are having the conversation in the sense that, maybe I'm wrong, you guys can speak up, but the majority are saying that we need to make those moves. We need to make the moves now. And then you, as the city manager, have the discretion to continue those modifications and increases as you deem appropriate. You're the guy that has to look at the budget, day in and day out. Again, my thoughts.
No, I agree. I do have one more question, though, on the banner program.
We're going to get there. I was going to ask a question about the regulatory fees, just for clarity, to try to get a general sense of where it's going. But I haven't heard from two of the other council members about this question about how to be aggressive on the. Are we going to go somewhere with the program? Should staff bring back a program with a proposal with accelerated program and rental cost increases? I hear giving some discretion to city manager. I just want to make sure we're bringing back something that fulfills the majority's idea so we can get to that conversation next. So I've heard two. I'm just looking to understand, Deputy Mayor and Councilmember Garcia, where you all would like to see the next step in this conversation.
Yeah, well, I mentioned with a lot of the programs, I think like the ball fields, the rentals, I mean, as Councilmember Martinez said, yes, 147 is still much lower than the market rate, it is promising, and I would encourage nonprofits, churches to also reach out if there's any free spaces. I think we do. I think we need to be more aggressive, and I would I'm okay with doing like a 3-year phase into it, but I would also like to, like I said before, I think we need to increase at the cost of recovery, increase at the cost of inflation, because we can't be having these conversations, as Councilmember Marasco had said earlier. We can't be making these huge jumps where we had to correct, and it's just too painful every time we do it.
And there are a lot of churches out there that do provide access to their facilities for meetings, for nonprofits and things like that. I know our church does it continuously. So all you have to do is ask. Sign the little form.
Yeah, there are churches that I'm aware of that would be happy to provide space. So that is something that I would encourage community members to reach out to for that. I agree that we need to do something more on a regular basis to avoid having, as it's been expressed, sticker shock. I would agree with that. I think we do need to implement some kind of a step plan as we go into it. I think there are going to be some recreational activities that they're going to be subsidized. I don't think it'll just become cost prohibitive for us to put it to full on cost recovery. But in most of the cases, we're talking about the lighting. I think the level of support that the city has provided, I think to ask an organization to provide $20 an hour or $25 an hour for lighting, I don't think that is terribly difficult, because that becomes all of a sudden shared by an entire organization. Is a lot easier than for somebody to have to just out of their own pocket take an entire burden by themselves. So I don't know if that answers your question or anything more specific that you may want.
We're gonna caucus about this. I'm hearing that there's a general sense in this area to look at some of the fixed cost facility fees, some gradation and steps into that conversation. We may need to have a more full conversation on the programmatic side. I hear there's more challenge in that space, but we'll also look to see where we didn't do any increase and what the market has a little bit in that space. The last question I have is specifically about we proposed this step into the regulatory fees. There are a couple regulatory fees where we're not pursuing full cost recovery. I'm hearing that there is a desire to pursue full cost recovery, even in those spaces that we may have discounted some of those charges. So my question is more, is there a desire to maybe step into a 2-year program as opposed to a 3-year program, to just go and do it on the regulatory side?
Yeah, great question. Why were the recommendations made for 3 years to begin with?
Well, because I think as you heard, it was generally because there hasn't been CPI, there's been this buildup of this gap with the costs on those programs. So whereas you would have addressed it gradually in the past, this council's now faced the unenviable task of catching up. The question is, do you catch up in 1 year or do you catch up over a period of years, right? Because the costs are the costs. We could come back and have an accelerated program that goes right for catch-up, and then we do CPI after that. Or we could go into a program that is this step program that staff has proposed initially.
Yeah, I'm open to hearing from my colleagues. I'm personally okay with stepping into it over 2 or 3 years, but I'm willing to hear what everybody else has to say.
So, question in regards to developmental technology and long-range planning. We have no cost recovery in those areas right now. So do we then have to increase the cost of the other areas to offset that?
Well, we're focusing on immediate needs right now. Our long-range planning is we need to have long conversations about long-range planning. That's why we're not aggressively pursuing that. I think that was one of our focuses more on what we're going to do around Proposition S. That would then lead into better understanding of long-range planning. So right now, our long-range planning is not where it should be, but that's a bigger conversation about where we want to go.
And I would be okay with stretching it out to 3 years if our first year was bumped up or more aggressive than what I'm seeing.
I could get behind that. Yeah, I think, I think there's some thought that maybe doing it 2 years, but I agree with the 3 years that the first year might be more aggressive in order not to fall behind. Yeah. And I just want to clarify something with my 3-year approach that I had mentioned before. We're talking about this, not the programs. The programs I think we should do.
No, that's why I separated those two conversations.
Yes, I just want to be clear on that. Yes, okay. Thank you.
Did you have something else?
Yeah, I do, but.
Yeah, on the regulatory, it's fine. I think the considerate approach is phase. So on another regional board that I sit on, our fees were really low on regulatory fees, and we had to we were far from full cost recovery, and it was like a phase thing where usually it was the other way around. So I'm flexible, but usually it was like you start slow and then you ramp up so that they kind of prepare, right? That's usually how it's done, but I'm flexible. I do think there's definitely room to move more than what's being recommended, but phased approach, letting them know ahead of time is the considerate thing to do. It helps them prepare. And it's, I think, just general practice of these kinds of fee increases. So yeah, I'm fine with that, the 3-year approach. And again, bumping it up a little more. Like, for example, on the lighting, right, it was really low, $5 increase. So I'm okay with bumping it up a little more, right? So yeah, I'm generally, I think, on board with that. I would maybe suggest, not having the heaviest fee increase in the first year, but I'm open. Just, it's not the standard practice, that's all.
All right, so just what I was going to mention, I forgot to say about the regulatory fees. We're talking about increasing fees because this is cost recovery that we're not even close to that. But one of the things, or I hear from different community members that deal with this type developers and other people that have to apply, individuals and organizations tell me, Joe, you guys are charging all this and it takes forever to get a permit in Escondido. And I know we're not talking about enhancing the quality, but we need to figure something out, because we start increasing more and more our prices, our fees, and then we need to I think we need to deliver better quality together that goes hand in hand. So I just wanted to mention that, although this was not part of that discussion, or it was made clear that this is not about enhancing the quality of service, but I think they need to go hand in hand.
I totally agree. Thank you.
We lost our city manager. I need to make sure he's got everything he needs before we.
I'm curious, any thoughts on the banner program? I didn't hear anyone else really talk about
Yeah, I'm totally fine making that go to full cost recovery now.
I'm also.
What about getting rid of it?
Full cost recovery. I think if we get rid. Yeah, I think we do full cost recovery, and then I think just the market will phase it out.
If
get rid of it.
If staff were to decide to get rid of it, the only option that leaves is going through a third party, which I've since learned would probably be considerably more expensive than even what our full cost recovery is. So I have a feeling if somebody wants a banner hung, that will be the option they use. It's just going to be a little bit more expensive now.
I think if people know that it's $1,200 to put up a banner, they're going to look at other options, as you were suggesting. And
yeah, it just seems like it's not sustainable.
Councilman Garcia was saying. So
sounds like we all agree we can move the banner program up to full cost recovery.
Totally in support of that.
Do you have everything you need before we move on?
I have everything we need.
Perfect. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Now we'll go on to item 10, which is the capital improvement program.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members. My name is Lynn Cruz, accountant for the City of Escondido, and with me is Jonathan Schabel, Principal Engineer, and Angela Morrow, Interim Director of Utilities. Today, we are here to discuss preliminary 5-year capital improvement program and budget. Our presentation will provide an overview of the capital improvement program. We will highlight completed projects and update you on existing priority projects. We'll conclude with available revenues and the staff budget recommendations for this year. Before we dive into the details of this fiscal year's budget, we wanted to start by laying the groundwork for what the Capital Improvement Program is. The Capital Improvement Program consists of 293 projects totaling $265 million. These projects are conceptualized, budgeted for, designed, and constructed over the course of multiple years, often with a combination of many different funding sources, and by a multi-departmental team of staff, and often with the assistance of outside consultants and contractors. Tonight, we will discuss our recommendations for future capital improvement program spending. The purpose of tonight is to review new funding that will be requesting City Council's approval in June. For more information about the previously approved projects in the CIP, visit the city's new and improved website. The Capital Improvement Program is a long-term planning tool, as capital projects often require multiple years of funding, planning, and development. Budgets are projected over a 5-year period, while project concepts are refined and designs are developed. Each year, budget adoption secures funding for that year and establishes priorities for future funding. As a reminder, there are a number of factors that guide development of the preliminary capital improvement program budget. Staff recommendations for project selection, timing, and prioritization are made based on priorities set in adopted plans, as well as external requirements related to grant funding deadlines. Priorities are also guided by community and stakeholder input and city council direction. In addition, the draft CIP program is developed considering the timing necessary to develop projects, bandwidth of staff to deliver projects, grant funding deadlines, and timing to complete full project funding. As we explained at the top of this presentation, capital projects takes years to be completed. Efforts to reach out and engage with the community happen throughout the process, but most especially during the design and construction phases. Just recently, staff presented on the outcome of the playground equipment outreach, where the community was invited to weigh in on their design preferences. Shown on your screen are upcoming engagement efforts. Design outreach usually involves engaging with the community about their vision for a project as was done back in 2020 with the Escondido Creek Trail project, and include a variety of methods. Community meetings, online surveys, and option A versus B choices. The feedback is then incorporated into the design scheme created by the landscape architect, engineer, and other design professional. Once the project has been designed, bid, and awarded, then construction outreach happens, where the community is notified about upcoming construction schedules and traffic or utility service impacts. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan to give you a teaser of the completed projects in fiscal year 24.
Here's a list of 13 projects that were completed in fiscal year 2024.
I think you need to turn on your microphone, so sorry.
Here's a list of 13 projects that were completed in fiscal year 2024. When we return to the City Council in a few weeks for the CIP budget adoption, we'll take a deeper dive into these projects with more details and pictures. Now we're going to move on to existing capital projects. On January 31st, City Council approved the prioritization of the following projects in order to complete them by the deadlines associated with their funding sources and taking into account the limited staff bandwidth to manage and execute additional projects. On the next several slides, the projects in green are on track and on budget, and those in yellow are experiencing an issue, which we'll talk about in more detail when we get to those slides. Here's a list of 4 Parks capital projects that are in the construction bid award phase, which means they will soon start construction. For all of the existing projects we'll go over in the next handful of slides, with a couple exceptions, all of the projects are on schedule for completion in the timeframes shown. Project available balances shown are as of April 30th of this year. One of the exceptions is the Ryan Park Field Lighting Project. This project is in yellow because the construction bids came in higher than expected. Later in the presentation, when we discuss the Park Development Fund, staff will present a recommendation to allocate the needed funding to allow the project to be completed on schedule. Pending Council's approval of the CIP budget, staff will return June 26 to request approval of the Ryan Park Field Lighting Construction Bid Award. This table shows 5 parks projects and 1 library project, which are all currently in the design phase. Preliminary concepts have been developed for the splash pad at Grove Park, and a community engagement meeting has been scheduled for later this month, June 18th. The West Side Skate Spot project has just begun, and staff is preparing a request for proposals to hire a design firm. And now we're moving on to transportation projects. At this time, the city has 4 transportation projects which are in the construction phase and 1 project which is in the bid award phase and will start construction this summer. I wanted to note that Phase 2 of the Grand Vision Plan will break ground after Cruising Grand is over at the end of September, but construction activities are already underway. The city team is reviewing submittals and responding to requests for information from the contractor so they can order materials for the project and hit the ground running at the end of September. The city currently has 8 transportation capital projects in the design phase. Design is underway to replace the existing traffic signal at the Washington Avenue and Rose Street intersection, which will add protected left turns. The Clean California Escondido Monument project is in yellow because it's at risk of not moving forward. Staff are currently working with Caltrans to finalize the plans and specifications and get final approval from Caltrans before funding is potentially pulled.
So this is an issue for a lot of projects around the state that are not in the ground. Staff is going to be following up with Senator Brian Jones' office to help restore some certainty to this project. But as the council knows, the state's facing a $40 billion deficit and is actively retracting projects that are not in the ground. But we're going to be working on trying to get this one secured through Brian Jones' office.
This table shows 3 upcoming capital projects that have not yet started. The last 2 projects are awaiting federal funds. The first project is one of the safety improvement projects approved by the City Council during the adoption of the local roadway safety plan in May of 2022. This project includes the upgrading of existing traffic signals at 12 locations around the city to increase pedestrian safety by adding pedestrian countdown signal heads. Funding for this project has been secured. However, the traffic division is currently understaffed. Development Services Department is actively recruiting a city traffic engineer to support the implementation of this project and other traffic projects. This position is currently open and seeking applicants, so if you know of any traffic engineers, please send them our way, or HR.
On this slide, the first 2 projects listed are in construction. 4 projects are in the design phase, and the last project is upcoming. Approximately half of the project construction costs are funded through a combination of grants and low-interest loans.
In this next section of the presentation, we will provide the available revenue as well as the staff recommendation for the allocation of those revenues. In most cases, the staff recommendation is to allocate available funding into existing and/or ongoing projects, not only to continue to fund those projects that have already been prioritized, but to honor the limited staff bandwidth with previous commitments to completing prioritized projects. You'll also see that for some funding sources, the staff recommendation is not to allocate funding at this time and to return to council with budget adjustment recommendations. It's important for the City Council to still adopt the CIP budget on June 19th, even though not all funding has been allocated, so that the ongoing projects can move forward. The capital improvement program and budget consist of specific funding sources that are restricted by certain guidelines and regulations, or sources that were committed by council for a specific purpose. For example, when new development occurs in the city, development impact fees are collected for specific purposes such as public art, park development, traffic impact, drainage facilities, and public facilities fees. For water and wastewater projects, they're funded by customer user fees, and in some instances, reimbursements from the neighboring areas that share some of the facilities. The Utilities Department will also utilize low-interest loans for financing some of their larger projects. This chart identifies those restricted revenue sources that are allocated towards street-related projects. The largest source of street revenue for the city is about $5.5 million from transit allocations for fiscal year 2025. These resources are legally restricted to expenditures for street, pedestrian, and bicycle transportation programs. The city receives funding for street projects from transit allocations, which are funded by a half-cent county sales tax administered by SANDAG to fund local transportation projects consistent with the regional plan. There is around $5.5 million in available funds, consisting of transit allocations and an ending fund balance that includes interest earned in other activities. For the Escondido Creek Trail Bike Path Improvement Project, the $500,000 in transit funding is part of the overall program budget in order to bring the project over the finish line. These transit dollars are fully allocated to existing or annual projects. The city will receive an allocation of around $3.8 million for the SB1 Road Maintenance and Rehab Funds for Transportation, which is administered by the state of California. All of these funds are being recommended for allocation into the pavement maintenance and rehab program. The city will receive an allocation of around $4 million for the highway users tax account, which is also administered by the state of California. All resources are legally restricted for street-related expenditures within the public rights of way. As a reminder, in order to continue to receive these funds, the city has to provide matching general fund dollars to maintenance of effort of around $5 million.
And I'm going to mention the traffic signal radio maintenance project shown last in this table. We'll install wireless radios to support communication with and adjustment to our traffic signals throughout the city. This project provides a budget for ongoing maintenance and replacement of these wireless radios.
There's around $2.6 million in traffic impact fees that is anticipated to be collected from developers in fiscal year 2025, which are allocated to the projects shown. As dictated by state law, the mobility element implementation is a required aspect of the general plan.
So the mobility element update planned to be completed in the next fiscal year will result in a prioritized list of street improvement projects required to meet future transportation demands for build-out of the city. The mobility element implementation project sets aside funding annually for design, environmental review, and construction of the highest priority arterial improvement projects as identified in the mobility element update.
There's around $110,000 in street fund fees that are allocated to storm drain repair and North Iris pedestrian improvements for fiscal year 2025. North Iris is simply a pass-through from the developer that must be approved by council through the adoption of the CIP budget. The La Honda drainage project is complete. Per the development agreement, these funds are required to be paid to the developer. More details on this project are included in the preliminary CIP budget document. There are $5.6 million available for the allocation of these specific funds for non-street projects.
No new park projects are proposed due to staff capacity and the previous commitments that have been made to the timelines for completing existing projects. Therefore, staff are only recommending to allocate $180,000 of the available $1.6 million in park development funds to the Ryan Park Field Lighting Project. Bids for this project came in higher than estimated, and this funding is needed in order to be able to proceed with award of the bid. Upon approval of the CIP budget on June 19th, staff will return to council on June 26th for approval to award the construction contract for the Ryan Park Field Lighting Project. A workshop will be held this fall with council to discuss available options and recommendations for the remaining balance of the park development funds. This table shows staff's recommendation to program the fiscal year 2025 public facilities funds into these three projects. Some of these funds will be used for ongoing funding for new library circulating materials and for improving our citywide traffic signal communication. Upgrading traffic signal communication will support operational improvements, which will lead to smoother traffic flow through the city. As you can see, the majority of the funds are programmed toward exploring opportunities for relocating the public works yard.
Staff recommends to leave public art fees fund balance unallocated at this time, pending feedback from the Public Art Committee on the prioritization of projects and adoption of an annual work plan. Staff will return in July to seek council approval for the allocations of these funds.
PEG stands for Public Educational and Governmental Information. These fees are collected from cable companies in order to support the sharing of educational and governmental communication with community members. Staff's recommendation is to allocate $1.8 million in PEG fees toward improving security in the council chambers by installing security cameras, doors, and updating bathrooms in compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's anticipated this project will begin during the council holiday break in December of this year.
There is anticipated to be around $163,000 available from mostly interest earnings in that fund that could be allocated towards projects shown.
Utilities Department has many capital projects. What's shown here are only the projects that staff are recommending additional funding to in the fiscal year 25 CIP budget. One new project is requested, the Royal Crest Reservoir Elimination. This project will demolish an existing small steel tank that is in poor condition and has already been taken out of service by city staff. A total of $1 million from the Water Enterprise Fund Reserve is requested to fund the 3 projects shown here. This amount is consistent with the rate model presented in October of 2023. $2,905,000 from the Wastewater Enterprise Fund Reserve is requested to fund the 5 projects shown here. This amount is consistent with the rate model presented in October of 2023.
Note that in your attachment, there's an extensive list of projects that grows annually that have no funding. You'll notice that there are a variety of maintenance-based projects that aren't eligible for development fees but require capital replacement. We also continue to seek grant funding, but our needs continue to exceed our resources available. These cost estimates are based on when those projects were added to the unfunded list and do not reflect the cost that it moved forward. This year, research was conducted and staff vetted dozens of funding opportunities for the city, many of which have not pursued due to funding restrictions or conflicting timelines and due to lack of staff capacity. However, we have applied for almost $20 million in funding for the CIP and operations, and currently we're still awaiting notice on about $13 million. This slide shows grant funding received this fiscal year in support of high priority capital projects. This slide shows pending grant funding in support of high priority capital projects. To recap our presentation, here's a list of projects that staff recommends to be funded in fiscal year 2025. It is requested that additional funding is allocated to existing projects to ensure completion. This slide shows existing library, public works, wastewater, and water utilities projects. This list reflects existing street projects. The total fiscal year 2025 projected revenue allocated towards identified CIP projects is $24 million. And this concludes staff's presentation. It is requested that City Council authorize staff to move forward with preparing the fiscal year 2025 to 2029 5-year capital improvement program and budget, and return with the final document on June 19th for approval.
Thank you both. Do we have any public comments on this item?
None.
Okay. With that, I'll open it up for discussion.
I just had a real quick question on the Citricado Parkway estimated time of completion. It said mid-2024. Was that correct, or perhaps a typo?
Yeah, that's correct. You're talking about the Citricado Parkway extension? Yes. Yeah, I mean, we're working with SDG&E. We have been delayed a little bit getting their high voltage distribution out of the way so we can finish that sound wall, but we should be done middle of this year.
That's great. Thank you. Amazing.
No, thank you for the presentation. No questions, but I would just like, I appreciated the update on the Washington and Rose intersection. That was something that we put on the agenda. We prioritized as number one on the traffic signal priority list. Probably been like 2 years. And when I was at the street fair, one of the residents came to me not happy and said, what's going on? And I said, it's actually a 3-year process. So I'm like, I think there's a year left. So thank you for confirming the time. It looks like next year, summer next year is when that'll be complete. I wish it was sooner, but from what I've researched, that's the typical turnaround time is 3 years to get a new traffic signal up. So really happy to see that, and I will support staff recommendation.
What's that? I don't think we need a...
No need to vote on this item.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right, item 11 is the review of our noise ordinance. Is it Captain? Captain Banks? Okay, perfect. Time's yours.
So I'm going to provide a little bit of introduction for Captain Banks. This item, after some conversations with individual council members and the mayor, and the pending issues surrounding a potential short-term rental program for the city, one of the major issues that often accompanies short-term rentals is noise. And so we wanted to make sure we gave a council a baseline understanding of what we do and maybe some recommendations for moving forward at the end as we consider the implementation of short-term rentals.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council. My name is Ryan Banks, and I'm the Operations Captain for our Police Department. This evening, I will be giving a presentation on noise ordinances and response in the city. The purpose of this presentation is to provide information on noise complaints the city currently responds to, enforcement, and some legal limitations. Additionally, I will provide noise complaint statistics in general and for short-term rentals specifically. Finally, I will discuss potential courses of action to address noise complaints moving forward. Between January 1st, 2020 and December 31st, 2023, the Escondido Police Department had an average of 90,533 total incident numbers. 2.8% of our dispatched incident numbers were noise-related calls for service. The police department's computer-aided dispatch system only maintains information for 5 calendar years. For calendar year 2024, between January 1st and May 31st, 745 of the incident numbers were related to noise. This is just under 2.7% of our total dispatch calls for service in 2024. This slide shows the breakdown of noise complaint calls from the beginning of 2020 to May 31st, 2024. The noise calls for service are barking dogs between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., loud party calls with someone willing to sign a citizen's arrest, and miscellaneous noise calls with a person willing to sign a citizen's arrest form. Total calls for service regarding noise complaints have been trending downwards since 2021. There has been about a 10.5% decrease in total noise-related calls for service from 2021 to 2023. This graph represents the total number of miscellaneous noise and loud party calls for service for the 2023 calendar year. In total, there are 1,959 calls for service for miscellaneous noise and loud parties. 78% of the time, the noise complaint was resolved after one call for service. 22% of the time, there was more than one associated incident number for the same occurrence of miscellaneous noise or from a single loud party. The residents and visitors of Escondido will typically respond to an officer's request to quiet down on the first response. Of the times officers were dispatched to a location only once in 2023, 43% of the time officers made contact with the offender and gave them a warning or a report was taken. 57% of the time, there was no need to contact the offender because the noise was not heard by officers when they arrived on scene, the source of the noise left the area, or the call was canceled by the reporting party. This graph represents the individual sources of noise and the corresponding times an incident number was attributed to a single occurrence or source of noise. 1,530 occurrences had only one corresponding incident number. 168 occurrences had 2 incident numbers, 111 occurrences had 3 incident numbers, and 3 occurrences had 4 incident numbers. I would like to point out that simply because there's an associated incident number does not mean that is the number of times officers made contact with residents and advised them of the complaint. Some other examples of final dispositions for these calls are that the call was canceled by the reporting party, the reporting party was unwilling to sign a citizen's complaint when contacted by the officer, the reporting party did not answer telephone calls from officers to sign a citizen's complaint, or the noise was no longer present when an officer arrived in the area. In 2023, there were 16 identified addresses with 10 or more incident numbers for noise complaints. These addresses accounted for 12% of the total number of miscellaneous noise and loud party calls for service in 2023. In order to efficiently allocate our limited staffing resources, the police department uses a prioritization system to assign an order of urgency for response to radio calls. This system also establishes a goal for response times. These radio calls are ordered numerically, with priority 1 being the most urgent and priority 5 radio calls having the lowest precedence. Priority 1 calls are emergency situations which are dispatched immediately. These calls generally require a Code 3 response, which means officers will respond with their lights and sirens activated. Examples include calls for an officer who needs emergency assistance, suicides, serious injury accidents, drownings, non-breathing children, shootings, and stabbings. There were 599 Priority 1 calls for service in 2023. That year, officers were dispatched in an average of 47 seconds. The goal for an officer arrival is 5 minutes. In 2023, we arrived on scene in an average of 3 minutes and 43 seconds. Priority 2 are calls which are of an urgent nature and will be dispatched within 2 minutes. Examples include serious crimes in progress or having just occurred where the possibility of catching the suspect exists, robbery alarms, young children who are lost, domestic violence, and fights involving weapons. As a reminder, the goal time for dispatching these calls is 2 minutes. There were 8,409 Priority 2 calls for service in 2023. That year, officers were dispatched in an average of 1 minute and 45 seconds. The goal for officer arrival is 6 minutes and 30 seconds. In 2023, officers arrived on scene in an average of 6 minutes and 12 seconds. Priority 3 call types occupy the middle priority, and the goal is to dispatch these calls within 20 minutes. Examples of Priority 3 calls include shoplifter in custody, non-injury traffic collisions blocking traffic, evaluations for mental health holds, and audible residential burglary and commercial burglary alarms. In 2023, there were 18,165 Priority 3 calls for service. While these calls do not need to be dispatched for 20 minutes, that year we averaged a dispatch in 16 minutes and 22 seconds. The goal for officer arrival is 20 minutes. In 2023, officers arrived on scene in an average of 20 minutes and 49 seconds. Priority 4 calls or less urgent calls for service may be held up for 2 hours. Examples include miscellaneous noise calls, party calls, trespassing, suspicious vehicles, and suspicious people. In 2023, we responded to 14,091 Priority 4 calls for service. That year, we averaged dispatch in 26 minutes and 53 seconds. The goal for officer arrival is 2 hours. In 2023, officers arrived on scene in an average of 31 minutes and 45 seconds. Priority 5 calls are the lowest priority for dispatching. Officers are not dispatched to these calls and will volunteer for them as time allows. Examples include crime cases which a suspect is not present and there is no violence, ticket sign-offs, Escondido Municipal Code violations, and barking dog calls between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. In 2023, there were 4,403 Priority 5 calls for service. While there is no time goal for dispatching these calls, in 2023, officers volunteered and were dispatched in an average of 35 minutes and 10 seconds, and officers arrived on scene in an average of 42 minutes and 43 seconds. There are 3 noise call types officers can be dispatched to. These types are barking dogs, miscellaneous noise, and party calls. For barking dog calls between the hours of 7 a.m. and 10 p.m., Residents are directed to the Humane Society for response. When Humane Society is made aware of a barking dog, they will send a warning letter for the first complaint, a secondary warning letter for the second complaint, and on the third complaint, they will attempt to contact the owner. Between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., the police department responds to barking dog complaints. These complaints are a priority 5, and officers volunteer to handle these calls as time allows. In 2023, we had 55 incidents for barking dog complaints. The City of Escondido has a municipal code regarding the enforcement of barking dog complaints. Loud party calls are categorized as a party call based on what is being reported to the call taker in police dispatch. Party calls are a priority 4 and must be dispatched within 2 hours. Miscellaneous noise complaints are a catch-all category and includes music from parked vehicles, loud talking, noise from televisions, loud generators, events at local schools and churches, and the ambient music some businesses use to discourage loitering. It is a priority 4 call and must be dispatched within 2 hours. Construction noise will be handled by code compliance during normal business hours. In light of miscellaneous noise calls and party calls, which must be dispatched within 2 hours, I would like to remind you that in 2023, officers were dispatched in an average of 26 minutes and 53 seconds and arrived on scene in 31 minutes and 45 seconds. So if you feel someone is violating the law and disturbing your peace, call the Escondido Police Department's non-emergency number at 760-839-4722 and select option 9. Give dispatch all of the pertinent information, and you must be willing to sign a citizen's arrest for disturbing the peace. Officers will respond to the location and may contact you to have a citizen's arrest form signed. If you are unwilling to sign a citizen's arrest, the officer will be unable to enforce state or city noise ordinances. This is a basic diagram of the life cycle of an arrest case. For the purposes of noise-related offenses, the arrest would come in the form of a citation issued to the person in violation of the law. In the case of a violation of state law, after the arrest is made, the arresting officer completes an arrest report documenting the facts of the case. The case is sent to the district attorney's office for review. After review, the district attorney makes a decision to prosecute the case or to reject it. The decision to prosecute or not is made based on the facts of the case and the district attorney's interpretation of the law. An arrest, or citation, for an Escondido Municipal Code violation is similar, with the exception being the case is sent to the city attorney's office. The review and decision to prosecute the violation is completed by the city attorney's office. So the state code that we would use to cite for loud noise would be Penal Code 415. The specific portion of the section used to enforce a noise complaint states, any person who maliciously and willfully disturbs another person by loud and unreasonable noise. California Penal Code 7 goes on to define the word willfully, when applied to the intent with which an act is done or omitted, implies simply a purpose or willingness to commit the act or make the omission referred to. It does not require any intent to violate law or to injure another or to acquire any advantage. It goes on to define the words malice and maliciously to import a wish to vex, annoy, or injure another person or an intent to do a wrongful act established by either proof or presumption of law. In order to be found guilty of this offense, the prosecution must prove that the defendant maliciously and willfully disturbed another person by causing loud and unreasonable noise. In order to disturb another person by causing loud and unreasonable noise, there must be either 1, a clear and present danger of immediate violence, or 2, the noise must be used for the purpose of disrupting lawful activities rather than as a means of communication. These cases are often rejected by the district attorney's office. When the case is rejected by the district attorney's office, they will send a letter to the police department indicating the legal reasons why a case cannot be prosecuted. Frequent language in these case rejections point to no independent witnesses, noise must be for the purpose of disrupting lawful activities, First Amendment protection on speech, the defendant did not act with malicious intent, or they did not disrupt lawful activities or create a threat of immediate violence. In anything an officer does, they have to work within the authority granted by the United States Constitution, case law decisions, laws of the state of California, and department policy. While it is the job of the police to maintain the peace in the community, freedom of speech and expression, the protection from illegal searches and seizures of persons and property, and the right for an accused person to face their accuser in court are some of the factors officers must consider when responding to noise complaints. The police have the task of balancing one's rights to play music, work on their home, have gatherings, spread ideas through speech, and practice with their band, with the rights of others to have a peaceful time at their home or work. Officers need to determine that the noise is not only loud, but unreasonable. At times, there is conflict because of the subjective nature of the word unreasonable. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution protects an individual's freedom of speech and expression from the government. It states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances. The courts have noted music as a form of expression and communication is protected under the First Amendment. This protection extends to amplified music. Another constitutional consideration is the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment addresses seizure of property as evidence, arrest of persons, and arrest and search warrants. So it states that the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by an oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. This means that an officer cannot enter a residence and arrest somebody or take their stereo equipment solely based on a noise complaint. If an officer is denied entry into a home or secured backyard, or has no lawful reason to enter, the officer cannot enter those areas. We are unable to seize stereo equipment, musical instruments, or other sources of the noise complaint without consent to enter the home or secured backyard. Furthermore, judges will not authorize a search warrant for misdemeanor crimes to seize the sources of those noise. Additionally, we cannot turn the power off to stop the speakers, stereo, or other source of noise. There may be individuals inside of the residence who have medical equipment needed to maintain their health. We may be depriving people of any food which spoils in the refrigerator. There may be a loss of other property, such as the death of animals in fish tanks or terrariums, which require the electricity to maintain a healthy environment. While the initial intent to preserve the peace of the community is admirable, the unintended consequences of turning off the power are unjustified in the case of noise complaints. There are times in which the residents of the location where the noise is coming from do not answer the door when the police attempt to make contact with them. The police do not have the authority to forcefully enter the home to make the arrest in these cases. While it is possible to complete an arrest warrant for violators of the law to be arrested later, the difficulty lies in identifying who is to be arrested. There are countless times in which multiple people live at an address. The Sixth Amendment guarantees a person's right to a fair, speedy trial and the right to face their accuser. It states that in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with witnesses against him, to have the compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. This is important because California law indicates that police officers cannot be a victim of disturbing the peace. This protects people from the arbitrary and impulsive enforcement of noise ordinances, and ultimately the suppression of speech and expression by the government, which would be the police in this case. As noted earlier, when a person calls the police to report a noise complaint, they will be asked if they are willing to sign a citizen's complaint, otherwise known as a citizen's arrest form, for disturbance of the peace. As a reminder, under California law, a police officer's peace cannot be disturbed, and they cannot be a victim of disturbing the peace. That would be an example of the government regulating speech or expression. A police officer observing a social gathering and hearing loud music cannot enforce Penal Code 415 without a citizen who has reported the noise as having disturbed their peace. The Escondido Police Department will not respond to noise complaints without a victim who is willing to sign a citizen's arrest form. There are several reasons behind this. Primarily, an officer who responds without a victim willing to sign a citizen's arrest form has no authority to enforce any noise-related section. Additionally, if they respond to a location without the authority to make an arrest and a use of force ensues, one of the questions the police department will need to answer is what authority they had at the time of the use of force. When a person signs a citizen's arrest form, they are not only indicating that they are a victim of disturbing the peace, but the police department is acting as an agent for the person signing the form. The officer still needs to establish the arrest is lawful and there is enough evidence to make the arrest. When a person signs a citizen's arrest form, it allows the Escondido Police Department the authority to arrest the offending party. We absolutely must have a victim who is willing to identify themselves to us and is willing to make the citizen's arrest for this section. The person signing the citizen's arrest form is also indicating they're willing to testify in court, allowing the accused person the right to face their accuser. Short-term rental information is not currently tracked by the Escondido Police Department. During my research, I was able to identify 3 locations that are likely short-term rental locations. And that was determined through the notes entered in by the call taker during the initial complaint and by officer notes entered in the computer-aided dispatch system. Between January 1st, 2020 and May 19th, 2024, these locations comprised 23 of our noise complaints. Location 1 had 14 incident numbers for noise complaints. Location 2 had 6 incident numbers for noise complaints. And location 3 had 3 incident numbers for those noise complaints. These are the identified locations which are likely short-term rentals. If elected officials or other city departments have information on additional locations being used as short-term rentals, I would encourage the information be passed on to the Chief of Police. Moving forward, I would like to propose some recommendations for city staff to explore. The first recommendation is to evaluate and review the current Escondido municipal codes to clarify language and ensure that the statutes are enforceable and legally sound based on current case law decisions. I would also like to evaluate potential cost recovery options for police response to noise and party complaints. Secondly, I would seek to enforce the appropriate Escondido Municipal Code sections versus using the California Penal Code for enforcement. The benefit would be the decision to prosecute would lie with the city attorney's office instead of the district attorney. Some challenges which need to be overcome are the need for decibel readers to enforce EMC 17-229, which makes it unlawful for any person to cause or allow the creation of any noise above the established 1-hour average sound level. Additionally, the enforcement of the General Noise Ordinance, EMC 17-240, would require a person willing to sign a citizen's arrest form and may face many of the legal challenges that enforcing the California Penal Code faces. This route would also increase the workload of the city attorney's office. If the concern for the source of noise is short-term rentals and/or chronic violators, data would need to be collected on the properties in question. There would be an additional need for liaisons between code compliance, the police department, and the city attorney's office to ensure information is collected, shared, and enforcement actions are taken where appropriate. The need for additional staff is currently being reviewed and will be presented at a later time. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Do we have any public comments on this?
None.
Okay, I have a few questions. What was it, a citizen's arrest that we have to sign? How does this work? How does the process work? If somebody has a noisy neighbor and they call, I know dispatch says, are you willing to sign a citizen's arrest form? Yes, I am. Then what? And how's it supposed to work?
Sure. So we fill out the information on the form. Citizen signs a citizen's arrest form. We go over to the address where the violation is, identify the suspect, and issue them a citation for the penal code section or the Escondido Municipal Code section. Based on that, the life cycle of the arrest case would go forward. So the penal code would go over to the district attorney for evaluation, and the EMC would go to the city attorney's office for evaluation.
Okay, this because I asked about this several months back, just out of my own personal curiosity and because we were going through the short-term vacation rental process. And I know for myself, I've called 5, 6, 7 times in a window of several hours. And every time I'm asked, will you sign this? I say yes, and then I've never once signed it, and it's been 250 calls. So what? It just seems like something's broken there because what you just told me is different than what my own experience is. So how do we fix that? Because we're not even committing to signing the paper, which sounds like it's the initial step. So how do we fix that?
Which part are you looking to fix, sir?
Well, like I said, I've been asked if I've been willing to sign this report, hundreds of times, and never once have I actually been given this thing to sign. So how does that happen?
So I don't have the answers for that right now. If you can give me the specific address, I can research it and give you an answer to that, sir.
I can certainly do that, and I see Chief coming up here. And it's not just me, it's several people that I've talked to who have the same problem where, we call over and over and over, and it just seems like there is no course for restitution.
Yeah, good evening. Just for the record, Ed Varsiger, Chief of Police. One of the struggles that we always have is the overwhelming majority of the calls that we respond to that are noise related. When folks talk to the dispatcher, they'll say they're willing to sign. When a police officer shows up at their door and explains to them that what that means is they are the one person placing that person under arrest. And then when you look at the form, it also even goes into such a detail that explains that means you're also civilly responsible for all of the outcome, going to court, the whole process. Most people, and understandably so, when they reach that point, they start thinking about the fact that this is their neighbor, and they very quickly become reluctant to sign. Very few people are ever willing to sign it because of those legal requirements. So a lot of times what happens is a police officer, they get that initial call, they'll see the comments in the call that the person's willing to sign. The officer will at least make some effort to try to get the problem to go away without having to go to that resident, because they know, first off, the resident's probably not interested in signing to begin with. Usually then, if the recall happens, and like Captain Banks showed, majority of the time, that solves it. We don't need to go down that legal route.
I guess I appreciate that, but the experience of the people I've talked to and myself, we're not even getting the initial opportunity, ever.
That's what I'm saying, is that's because the police officer is going to that house and taking care of the problem. Well over close to 80% of the time from the data that was showed in the presentation, that is effective, and that's all that's needed.
Okay.
And if that's all that's needed, especially when we know that the case that we do submit, because we do issue citations, when they go to the DA's office, the result has been 0 have been prosecuted.
And I totally understand that part of it. Yeah, I understand that. Okay. How do we make the switch from using the DA's office to city attorney's office?
We will get into it deeper. That's going to be a staffing issue, and we wanted to set the table that as you go through this process with short-term rental, as we had a conversation before between gross and net funds to actually stand something up, this is going to be one of those conversations about a staffing model that will be presented with a short-term rental, which would transition us to doing that in-house and not relying on the district attorney. But there, as has been illustrated in the presentation, there are things that we would need to do to staff to meet that. We would also honestly have to look at the Escondido Municipal Code. The city attorney would need to review that and make sure that that code is compliant with the law.
Understood.
Can I just jump in on that as well? Because the model for the short-term rental ordinance right now has its own noise control in it, its own noise provisions in it for enforcement. You would have as well your standard Escondido Municipal Code sections, what we just went through, and you would have the short-term rental ordinance. The short-term rental ordinance noise controls and enforcement provisions are not within the penal code. So those would be coming to the city attorney's office. So as we ramp up that program, this is what we were just talking about, is I don't have a trial bench ready of prosecutors ready to do that. They are resource loads, quite frankly. So we would kind of look at the costing for adding new resources to my office if we were going to do that. And that would be true if we were going to change the methodology of going from the DA's office and penal codes to the Escondido Municipal Code as the primary source of enforcement for noise, your general noise ordinances like what we just talked about. Again, that same concern that I have resides as well. So, but we stand ready, and I'll follow up as well on the last comment from the city manager. We look back at the noise ordinance that exists today. It was last updated in 1990. It's over 30 years old. So it does need some tweaking. There is new law out there. First Amendment issues always prevail in these kinds of things. So we do want to be careful, but we want to be as aggressive as possible to ensure that we have quiet neighborhoods and we have reasonable living accommodations. But when you look at the language that exists today, just to give you a flavor for what it looks like, in order to, and this is why it's important when we hear about Sixth Amendment concerns of being able to confront your accuser, that's why you go through these citizens arrest forms. This is the standard by which that noise is being reviewed, and that is the person has to have had committed a disturbing, excessive, or offensive noise which causes discomfort or annoyance to reasonable persons of normal sensitivity. And if you don't have somebody there who can demonstrate that there's someone of normal sensitivity and this was such an excessive noise that it was offensive, then that case is going to fall apart, whether it's the DA's office or mine.
Understood. Okay, I don't have any other questions. Does anybody else? No? Go ahead.
Thank you. So citizens arrest is a form. It's a complaint pretty much, but it's called citizens arrest.
So there are certain misdemeanors which, if it's not committed in the officer's presence, or in this case, like a disturbing the peace where the officer can't be the victim, we need somebody to basically execute that arrest for us because we didn't witness it and we can't be a victim of it. So that it's saying that we're acting as an agent for this citizen because it's the job of everybody to enforce the law, but the police do it as a full-time job.
Got it. But there isn't actually anyone placed in handcuffs because of it, right?
It's going to depend on the crime.
Okay.
In the case of a disturbance.
For what we're talking about. Because I think for me, what I'm thinking about, and I think about just kind of, we have bilingual, citizens and just kind of arrests, that makes me think of a person in handcuffs, and I'm wondering if that's causing confusion and pause for people filling out that form.
So I can't speak to what people are thinking through that process. Mm-hmm. When you really boil it down, when you receive a traffic ticket, you're essentially being arrested for that violation and then being released on your written promise to appear.
Okay, got it. And then it looks like we have been responding to things under the penal code, but not necessarily the municipal code. Is that correct? Because what you mentioned, all those calls for service, that had to do with the penal code, or are you talking about both penal code and municipal code violations?
So I don't have the numbers specifically of how many each that we did. I would generally weigh on the side of the penal code because it generally goes to the higher code, quote unquote.
Okay.
And I think that's part of the challenge here. You're hearing from the city attorney that the municipal code is outdated. 1990, and I think what has happened over time is that the penal code is much more up to date. So this creates its own, when you don't update your municipal code to meet the standards of the penal code, this is where we start to have challenges, right? And so if you don't, and again, because we haven't staffed to do this type of enforcement, it becomes its own circle back on itself, right? Mm-hmm. So you're not doing the work, you're referring that work to another party. That another party is clearly making choices that this does not reach their threshold. And frankly, is kind of kicking it back to you, saying you have a municipal code, why aren't you enforcing this to the municipal code? I think this is where these confusions lay out. I'm not saying, I would agree with the city attorney. It's going to be interesting to see if our results are any better, but at least we would be controlling the process from the beginning to the final disposition, and we could look at the results of that enforcement. When you take it outside of your operation and turn it over to somebody else, I think that may lead to frustration for community, officers involved. You don't get into a conversation and a review. But at its root, the municipal code has not been updated, and there's language that is out of date in the municipal code which would not pass our current legal standards.
Can we go back to
We have to update that code.
And when would we have an opportunity to do that?
City attorney?
Well, let me put that on my list of things to get. But in all seriousness, we have put that into, so I'm talking about short-term rentals just for a moment, because that's what generated this discussion, an important discussion, because it's not just short-term rentals of a new program, but it is what you've described as you have loud noises for your neighbors, and it's been going on for some period of time. It's not a short-term rental issue. So we we could go through that and look at that, but there's a certain level of work that's a writing exercise of making sure that you're up to date. The noise ordinance is quite lengthy, so we require a certain amount of effort to go through that. But it's depending on the council's priorities, and we would certainly accommodate the council's priorities.
But remember also in a short-term rental, the ultimate issue that we're going to, when we review it, is we control the business license for them to be able to do business as a short-term rental, which is, again, why the city attorney to pursue our nuisance and our ability to remove that business license and enforce it. So while they're interrelated, they're not exactly the same pathway as we do enforcement, but they do have interrelation to them.
And if I could add one more thing to that, and I think that's really important. Part of the short-term rental ordinance as it's currently drafted includes administrative efforts too, not just the licensure, but you can go through administrative sites. So you're not going through a criminal process, which slows things down. Prosecutor, whether it's the DA or the city attorney, has to examine during the charging and prosecuting of the case as to whether or not they can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Pretty high standard. That's not true with administrative citations, and that's certainly not true with licensure. So your greatest source of control and enforcement over the short-term rentals is going to be through the administrative and licensure process. You'll have fines, but they're administrative fines. They're not criminal fines.
Understood.
And then if I could, I'm sorry, if I could just, I'm following up on part of your question.
Thank you.
Yeah. The other thing I would add too on your thoughts when it comes to the form and the verbiage used, I hear you loud and clear. One of the struggles that we have to keep in mind is that form is laid out the way it is to meet requirements within state law. So, if I change the title of the form to make it feel a little bit more accepting, right, then I'm risking not being as candid with the person as to how serious it is for them to place somebody under citizen's arrest and what the legal ramifications of that are. But the officers do typically explain to somebody filling that out that what it means, what is actually going to happen. So they would be explaining to them, yes, you're placing the person under citizen's arrest. You're going to have to go to court and testify against this person. And what that means for tonight is they're going to be issued a citation and released.
And then the court date, right?
Correct.
Could we go back?
And if I could chime in, in my two experiences, that's exactly what happened. Is when I reported it, they explained it, and they explained that a citizen's arrest is not me going over and putting somebody in handcuffs. So, I'm be a big guy sometimes, but.
Could you go back to the slide with the numbers of the calls that you get? I think, what was it? Yeah, so you had mentioned these are the numbers that you get. So would you say that these are just the calls? These don't mean that actually someone signed a form, right? These are just calls that you received regarding noise.
Correct. These are the numbers of incident numbers in total that we have, or incident numbers attributed to barking dogs, loud party, miscellaneous noise.
Okay. Have there been people who have signed the form and just followed it through the process and, it got rejected from the district attorney's office? Has that happened?
Yes, ma'am. There was some of the language I had in here. The DA rejected it, and it was for things such as First Amendment considerations. It wasn't willful and malicious.
Okay.
Things of that nature. So yes, we have received letters from the DA rejecting our cases.
Okay, so there have been people that have gone through that process full on and pursued it. And just, it's interesting because I'm, hearing about the music is protected free speech, because I do also hear, you can't have music after 10 p.m. Like, it's okay to play music, but you can't have it loud after 10 p.m. And maybe that speaks more to the municipal code. And I do know, because I've been at parties where the police have showed up and have shut it down. So it's surprising to me that that's protected free speech. But I've witnessed at events where police come and they're like, you have to, turn your music down, or you have to, shut off your music. And that was a long time ago, like years ago. So I don't know if it was just followed differently back then. It was before your time, Chief Farso. I'm talking like 10 or more years ago. But I do remember lots of incidences in the community, where it's mostly Spanish-speaking music, and officers were called and told, hey, it's past a certain time, or, hey, the music's too loud, turn it off or turn it down. Is that still happening because of what,
Yeah, Councilmember Martinez, I think that goes back to the comments I made to Mayor White as well, that the officers are going there and making an effort to get somebody to try to quiet the music down. It doesn't matter what kind of party it is. It doesn't matter what the story is. I've responded to these calls and been asked if I want to grab some food with everybody in the backyard, right? It doesn't matter. We're there to get the noise to be quiet. It's the part when folks don't cooperate where it starts becoming tricky on the citizen's arrest piece of it. So we still, I could probably guarantee you that we're probably responding to a noise complaint right now.
So even if it's music, you still respond and you still say, hey, turn it down. Is there a rule on time, like after a certain time or of the day? Like in the day, you could play loud music, but not after 10 p.m.? Because I hear that a lot. I'm just trying to figure out if that's like a rule.
And this is where it's interesting, the difference between state law and city code.
Okay.
Because state law, it doesn't matter. It could be 12 noon. If
Okay.
somebody's peace is being disturbed, then that's what we're responding to. Municipal code gets a lot more nuanced, which then goes back to the conversation about the importance of re-looking at the 30-year-old ordinance.
Okay, and that might be where the time maybe comes of like past a certain time. It's just things that I hear, and so I want to it is confusing, and I would be in favor of revisiting when, we have the capacity, but I think it's important to have clarity around our municipal code, and being that it was last updated in the 90s, we're really behind on that, and it's something that we owe it to our residents to at least give them accurate information, and that they feel that there's actually like a process and clear rules of what's acceptable, what's not. And I would hope people just have more consideration in general, right? But so that people can actually be in their homes and not hear music, But and I guess it is complicated, right? It is complicated. So thank you for that. I was just saying there's a lot of confusion around this because we have those two, right? State and then the municipal. And then also when constituents do call, I feel like we kind of, they're not getting clear answers. And so I would like for that to be more clear for them, even if we're limited because of state law, freedom of speech. We owe it to our residents to, know their rights, know what they can pursue, and try to resolve the matter, especially if it's something that continues to happen.
Councilmember Martinez, can I address just quickly the time frames, because there are provisions in the municipal code that relate to the times, and that is for sound level limits. So in the residential zone between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m., you can't have anything more than 50 decibels over a certain period of time. And then there are time frames for different zones, which is different than just music. I mean, it's just any noise over a certain decibel level for a certain period of time is going to be a prima facie violation of the municipal code. Then on top of that, you have loud and disturbing noises, which could be music, barking dogs, or whatever, and that's the reasonable sensitivities of the normal person. So you could have two different things for a music hall, depending on decibel level.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's probably where the time comes in. So I appreciate you mentioning that.
All right, thank you. I think that's it. Thank you both.
Thank you.
It's a no. For future agenda, I think I mentioned earlier, the work plan for cannabis. And then as well, I'd like to ask the council to consider taking up a resolution in opposition of the Seguro battery storage project just outside of Escondido city limits.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
And Deputy Mayor, you seconded the cannabis work plan, correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you both. Anybody else need to add anything to a future agenda? Okay, move on to council member subcommittee reports. Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you, everyone. Let's see. So just we don't have a council meeting next week, but I did want to put on your radar that it was mentioned at tonight's meeting. There is a splash pad community meeting that will take place on June 18th. It's a Tuesday at 5 p.m. at Grove Park. So please spread the word, bring your families, and participate in the community meeting to talk about the future splash pad at Grove Park. Really excited. This weekend it's June, so happy Pride Month. This Saturday, I had an opportunity to attend the Pride at the Beach that's hosted. It's our North County Pride event, and it's been going on for 17 years. And I usually attend every year, so I was really excited to participate in that family-friendly community event. And earlier this week, I spoke to fourth graders at Farr Elementary School about City Council, what our role is, and I also invited them to the splash pad meeting, so I hope that they will tell their parents and they will be there. And also, I was able to participate on Friday. The California Cooperatives organization hosted their annual conference. It happened to be in San Diego, so I went to check that out. And today we had a school subcommittee meeting, and we had the San Diego Football Club come and present to us about their plans and how we could partner with them to bring activities, visibility, and support for our soccer-loving community here in Escondido. That's all I have for today. Thank you.
Go ahead.
We had a budget subcommittee meeting the other 2 days ago. I think it went well. I think we're making a lot of good progress in addressing the things that we need to address, coming up with creative ideas of producing revenue and cutting down our expenditures as you've all seen tonight. I've been speaking with many constituents this past week. I think just a lot of people are feeling comfortable reaching out, so thank you all to everybody who's reached out to me. So we had a CA meeting last week. We're looking at the budget and expectations. We're going to have the CEO come and speak at some point.
July 17th.
On July 17th, perfect, thank you so much. We had the Center for the Arts subcommittee meeting as well. There's a lot going on at the Center for the Arts. Please check it out. July 4th is the one that I think I'm most looking forward to. We had a school subcommittee, as my colleague just mentioned, and as always, thank you to my community for the privilege of serving you.
This past Saturday, I had an opportunity to speak at the gun show that was hosted at the California Center for the Arts. Also met with the Securo Battery Storage Facility community where that project is being proposed. There is, what do you call it? I guess an exhibition. There's an artist who's rented space at the North County Fair, Paco Pablos, which was pretty cool to be a part of. And I also had an opportunity to visit 2 fourth grade classes, an 8th grade class, and a sophomore class last year just to talk about all things city council, what it's like being mayor, and that was a lot of fun. So thank you.
So just a few things. On the 31st, we had a board forward for the board members of the NCTD. We had a wonderful opportunity to ride the Sprinter, the Breeze, and the Coaster, and made some very important decisions. One of the issues that I brought up was the safety concerns that we have here at the Escondido Transit Center, and I'd like to let the community know that they are well on the radar and there are changes that are coming that are going to make that area much safer, including better lighting, and a new contract that's coming up with in July will start for with additional security, and there's some other changes that are going to be happening there. I also, on the 31st in the evening, I was able to attend the Música en la Plaza with Mariachi Garibaldi, and that was a very well-attended and great community event. On Monday the 3rd, I had an opportunity to have a tour of Conway Academy of Learning, and it's impressive to have a tour done by the students. There was no principal, no teacher, no one that guided me through that tour, answered all my questions. It was very good. Then I had an opportunity later to be able to speak with the principal, taking that school from being the worst performing school in our district about 8 years ago to now outperforming every single school in the district, I think is an incredible feat that the administration there has done. May 22nd, I had a Northcom dispatch meeting. It was very good to be able to attend to these events representing our city. Thank you very much.
I'll be quick. On Memorial Day, there were several very good events here in the city of Escondido to remember those who have paid the ultimate price in the service of our nation. I had an opportunity to meet with the Escondido Fire Department Escondido Fire Association representative, and had a good discussion with him. Cruising Grand, as always, well attended, and this past weekend we had the 50-year reunion for Orange Glen High School, Escondido High School, and San Pasqual High School. It was a combined event. It was really well attended, and it was great to see a bunch of old people that you haven't seen in a long time. As the mayor mentioned, got to go to the gun show at the convention center next door at the Center for the Arts. He did a really good job in his speech, and also we met with concerned citizens in regards to the proposed Seguro battery storage unit to the west of Escondido, and that's my report.
I am good for this evening. Thank you very much.
Okay, any other public comments?
Yes, we have one speaker, Yvette Romero.
Good evening, Escondido. My name is Yvette Romero, and I am coming here because I was born in Escondido at the old Palomar Hospital. I no longer live here. I came all the way from La Mesa. I actually live in La Mesa. I grew up in the foster care system. I actually got taken away when I was 5 years old from Lincoln Elementary. Escondido Police Department removed us at the age of 5. So I've just been kind of going in and out of the county. I actually also lived at San Pasqual Academy. And in 2022, I wrote an op-ed for the San Diego Union Tribune to save San Pasqual Academy. And I work currently on the weekends here. I work with the special needs population, with adults with disabilities, as well as children with disabilities. I give parents a break so that they can go and kind of get in the community and help them with their children. The reason why I'm coming here is because I am an outsider. I don't live here, but I constantly see on Facebook people in the community here posting about crime. It's not even on the news. It's people that are on pages and saying like, hey, there's the chisme or whatever. And it's so much that like, I don't even want to come here, to be honest. And I wanted to come back to die here because this is where I was born. But there's so much crime. And I don't know if you guys realize, but here's like the city council, it's a gold mine for Pokemon and Pokestops. And this is somewhere where I used to come and take my children so we can walk around. And it's beautiful here. It's Escondido, it has so much richness, so much authenticity. There's so much history here. And I would love to continue to preserve that and to continue to for tourists to come here and feel safe. But I, as an outsider, don't even feel safe coming here on the weekends to work. And like I said, it's not even about the media. It's about your own community members posting what is going on in the community. And as an outsider, I am concerned. I am concerned for the community members, for the members that live here in the community, for the trauma. Like I heard Consuelo Martinez, council member, and her passion for the community. I also heard you guys use words such as aggressive and progressive when it comes to your fiscal, like the fiscal and the revenue and gaining all that stuff back. Use progressive and aggressive when it comes to combating crime in your community. That's all I really have to say. I only have 30 seconds. I've been here since 5. I have to drive back to La Mesa. But like I said, as an outsider looking in, it doesn't look too good. Thank you.
No further public.
All right, this meeting is adjourned.